Chair Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Kova. Councilmember DeBala. Councilmember Kostek. Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Searcy.
Here.
Great, thank you, everyone. Do we have Councilwoman DeBala on the phone? Not. No, maybe. All right. We'll check in and see. Our agenda this evening has no changes. Moving forward next week on Wednesday, October 10th, there will be no Wednesday night City Council meeting. A number of members of the City Council will be at the Maryland Municipal League Fall Conference. Then on Wednesday, October 17th, we have a number of work sessions that evening. The first will be a discussion of our legislative priorities for the upcoming session in Annapolis. Next, we have a discussion of the housing component of the draft Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan, a work session on the LED streetlight conversion, and a discussion of the Community Development Block Grants Project. Our voting item that's on the 17th, and then on Wednesday, October 24th, we tentatively have scheduled the first reading ordinance for the contract for the LED streetlight conversion. We have a consent agenda, which is a resolution endorsing the FY20 Community Development Block Grant Program, a single reading ordinance authorizing purchase of police body-worn cameras and in-car camera systems. A work session on that evening will be a discussion of amendment to the Tacoma Park Code, Chapter 8.36 on commercial management districts and authorities. Overview of amendments to the Tacoma Park Code purchasing chapters 7.04, 7.08, and 7.12. A discussion of ordinance regulating small cell antennas in the right-of-way. Our first quarter financial report will also be presented that night, and a discussion of our FY 2019 budget amendment number 2. So I say sleep well the night before. October 24th is going to be a doozy.
Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I wondered if we have a schedule yet or know what's going on with the tree ordinance?
Well, that is a good question. Our colleagues, Councilwoman DeBala, Councilwoman Kostek, and Councilmember Kovar, took that on and are working on a process that they will present to us in coming weeks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and Councilwoman DeBala is, thank you. And then on Monday, October 29th, we will be having a meeting on a Monday evening to continue our discussion of the housing component of the draft Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan, and that will take us through October. This evening, we have 2 items for the record. The first is a proclamation on Energy Efficiency Day, which is October 5th, and I think it's very appropriate that tonight we have a presentation on the LED streetlight conversions, and then our sustainability manager will be up telling us about our efforts regarding energy efficiency in the city. Our other proclamation this evening is for Indigenous Peoples Day, which is October 8th, and I will read this one for us. It says, whereas Columbus Day is observed as a federal holiday on the second Monday in October, and whereas the day recognizes the October 12, 1492 landing of Christopher Columbus on an island in the Caribbean, marking the Europeans' first contact with the New World. And whereas this contact began centuries of settlement on lands already occupied by native peoples of the Americas and exploitation of the New World's seemingly endless resources. And whereas Indigenous Americans experienced conquest, enslavement, displacement, and disease which disseminated the population. And whereas Native people who were removed from this area likely included the Piscataway, the Anacostak, the Pamunkey, the Manapanet, the Namaganic, and the Tehuxan. And whereas the City Council recognized the second Monday of October as Indigenous Peoples Day by adopting Resolution 2017-39, reimagining Columbus Day as an opportunity to celebrate Indigenous heritage and resiliency. And whereas although it is a federal holiday, Columbus Day is not a holiday for the City of Tacoma Park employees, and city government functions and meetings continue on their usual schedule. And whereas recognizing Indigenous Peoples Day serves as a reminder to reflect on the Native people who were here before us and their descendants. Now, therefore, I, Kate Stewart, Mayor of the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland, on behalf of the City Council, staff, and residents, hereby proclaim October 8th, 2018 as Indigenous Peoples Day in Tacoma Park to acknowledge and celebrate the culture and sacrifice of the first people of this land. All right. Our first item of business now is our public hearing on Community Development Block Grant Program. The Community Development Block Grant Program was initiated in 1974 and is one of the oldest programs at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. These grants are provided on an annual basis to communities to ensure decent, affordable housing for all, to provide services to the most vulnerable, to create jobs, and expand business opportunities. On June 15, 2016, the City Council adopted Resolution 2016-16, limiting the expenditures of these grants to allocations of capital projects. So these grants are provided through a pass-through from Montgomery County. Qualifying capital projects must be located in the designated eligible census tracts, and there is a map attached to this agenda item. And we will have a work session on this in upcoming weeks, and we'll take any comments on the grants. Anyone have any comments this evening? Okay, seeing none, then we will go to our presentations for tonight. We would like to welcome Mr. Jim Doherty. He's an environmental lawyer who we are very lucky just is a neighbor in DC. He's been working on light pollution issues since the early 1990s and is on the board of International Dark Skies since 1997. And I think we're going to pull up your presentation. The anticipation. I know. Oh, there we go. Great. Take it away. Oh, we see it here. You see it there? There you go. All right, Mr. Doherty, it is yours. Oh, I need to turn your mic on, though. You're good.
Okay, thanks. Madam Mayor, council members, guests. My name is Jim Doherty, as you mentioned, recent past president of the IDA board, current board member and leader in the Washington, D.C. chapter of IDA. They're also considering streetlight replacement. And I would add that we're anxious to form a Montgomery County chapter of IDA. Anyone's interested? Talk to me. The presentation I'll give tonight is similar to one some of you have seen before. Apologies for any duplication. I'm dealing with a bit of a cold. I have a laser pointer, which isn't going to do you any good, but for the benefit of the others, I'm going to use it. Oh, really? Let's see how that works. Yeah, not bad. A little too sensitive for my dumb hands. There, okay, great. So this is a nighttime satellite view of the Washington, D.C. area, and I've circled Tacoma Park. It's noteworthy that TP is darker than most of the other communities, certainly than the district, and many of the other communities just to the northwest a little bit is Silver Spring, which is well lit up. In comparison, Tacoma Park looks a lot more like Rock Creek Park to the west, Anacostia Park down to the south. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's no accident that Tacoma Park was so named. I hope you keep it that way. There's 7 reasons why I and my colleagues are in this business, and these are them. For one thing, bad lighting affects human health. I'll have a slide or two on that. It wastes energy. We've been trying to save energy in this country for about 30 years, and this is an easy, cost-effective way of doing it. Speaking of cost-effective, it's a big money saver, as you know, from switching to LEDs. In the last 20 years, what we learned is that all this electricity creates greenhouse gas emissions and global warming, so that's a big driver, especially for me. Loss of the night sky. Increasingly, children these days lose touch with the stars, and they're more focused on what's in their hand, and we think that's important. We think that kids need a sense of grandeur, and it's part of cultivating an environmental ethic, and that's being lost now because they can't see the skies. That's too bad. Wildlife. We've known for years that bad lighting affects sea turtles, and we think owls, but more and more the literature is coming in that affects everything. It affects the bugs that are out there. It attracts the bugs out of the dark green spaces into our communities, which we don't want. And when it does that, it hurts the dark green spaces because bugs are fundamental to the ecosystem. They're at the base of the food chain. They serve the essential role of pollination. There's bugs, there's fish, there's birds, you name it. And no, what we're learning now is actually plants. Plants exhibit different flowering patterns if they're exposed to light pollution all night. And finally, there's safety. bad lighting reduces public safety, and I'll get to that. Starting with human health, studies have been coming in for decades that people who work at night and are exposed to light at night suffer increased incidences of cancer and other health effects. This is partly because melatonin production is depressed when you're exposed to light. And melatonin is a powerful anti-cancer hormone. Secondly, our circadian rhythms are triggered by the sunrise, or at least they were over the millennia. Now they're not, they're thrown off. And when your circadian rhythms get thrown off, so is your health. Point two, fish and wildlife, as I said, more and more we're learning. They relit the bridge below Sacramento on the Sacramento River to have more efficient LEDs. They're a little brighter and they're a little bluer. And when they turned them on, what they found was that the salmon that were migrating stopped in their tracks. They couldn't handle the brighter, bluer lights. So they had to rip out all the lights and put in new ones. So who thought fish would care? But we're learning more and more throughout the whole ecosystem the adverse effects. So these are the 4 points that we advocate. And if you take nothing else out of this presentation, please take these 4 points. First of all, you need to get the brightness right. Standards are set. This is not really debatable. The American Association of State Highway Territorial Officers have standards. The Illumination Engineering Society has standards. We think these standards are probably too high, but we're not going to quibble with the engineers. If we set the lighting levels according to spec, we'll be doing it right. And what we found in DC when we've measured street level lighting is that they put in lights that are way too bright, too much power, 3 times as bright, 5 times as bright, often 8 or 9 times as bright as what's called for by the standard. And if you've got 9 times too much light going out, well then you're using 9 times too much electricity, you're generating 9 times as much pollution, and you're spending 9 times as much money. So it makes sense to put it on spec. And, what you have, and I think Tacoma Park gets this. You put the lights in during the day, and then you send a team out at night to measure the ambient lighting. In DC, they don't quite get that. They just throw in the lights. So hats off. Secondly, shielding. I'll get to that. Color temperature, you've heard a lot about. Warmer is generally better. And then finally, technology. There's a lot of technology out there associated with LEDs. In DC, it's, as you saw from that satellite picture, incredibly overlit. It's hard to see in a bright room. This is DuPont Circle looking north on Connecticut Avenue. At midnight, there are no cars, there are really no people. All the lights are on. The wall packs, whoops, wrong toy. They've got the wall packs here, they've got the globes down here, they've got globes up there. They actually have lights on top of some of these buildings, just crazy. They just love it. Here, this is Barracks Row, 8th Street Southeast. They got federal grant money for redoing the neighborhood, so they put in twice as many lights as called for. So they're 30 feet apart. It's a light party. Point number 2, shielding. The lamp at the top left is what we call a drop lens cobra. Cobra refers to the top, and the drop lens comes down several inches. And as a result, the light goes up. It goes sideways and it goes up. The one on the right is what we call a flat lens cobra. The luminaire is recessed inside the shielding, and so it comes down in a focused pattern, kind of what we do in our homes. You know, the light over your dining room table probably is like shielded that way. That's the way to do it, full shielding. This is one facility where they swapped out the lights. They started with wall packs, unshielded wall packs, and then lower right, they just put shields in. And they could use a lot less light, and it's much more appealing. It doesn't send trespassing light into the neighbors' homes. We've known for the longest time that when there's a bright light source that goes in your eye, everything in your optical system adjusts. Your pupils constrict, your visual cortex reacts in a million ways. The human eye and brain is amazingly excellent at adjusting from very dark situations to bright situations, from full sunlight to almost darkness. Your brain and your eyes make that adjustment. So what happens at night is, if you have a bright light there, your eye goes into reaction. Pupils constrict, and as a result, you can't see things that you would otherwise see. But if you put a shield over the light, then your eye opens up again, the pupils, the whole optical nervous system, and then you can start to see things like threats, like bad guys, like hazards. So that's our pitch on shielding. IDA for over 20 years now has approved certain kinds of light fixtures. And apparently you're shopping for and looking at IDA approved fixtures, so we applaud you for that, of course. in order to win our approval, you only need to meet 2 criteria. One is we want full shielding, and we're actually kind of loose on that. We just require that the light not go above 90 degrees. If it stays above horizontal, that meets that criterion. And if the color temperature is 3,000 Kelvin CCT or lower, it meets the other criterion, and we'll do it. What we really like off the record is 70 degrees. We want the light to go down to where the task has to be illuminated. Okay, on color. For the audience, most of these things are light bulbs. This, however, is a color distribution for daylight. And it's a full spectrum light. This is the top image and the middle image in the top line. Sunlight is amazing because it provides lots of light at all levels. There's really nothing else that matches that. The left image on the top row, tungsten incandescent, was the Edison tungsten filament light, and it too is fairly broad spectrum compared to the others you see, except that the Edison light bulb is more depressed in the blue area. And so it gives a warmer light. It's more of a yellow light. In fact, then they invented grow lights. Remember about 25 years ago? Well, that was a modified incandescent. They boosted up the blue so it would enable plants to grow and have and essentially duplicate sunlight. But they had to tweak it. And then you've all seen bug lights. Bug lights don't attract insects because they're warmer, so they'd be shifted even further to the right. And that's basically what we're looking for in all of our lighting, something closer to bug lights. These other lights, I love the low pressure sodium. It's almost a single frequency. This is left on the lower level. So in the neighborhoods around observatories in Arizona, they use LPS. And then when the astronomers take their night pictures with their computers, they can filter out that frequency. So they get a great image with just that one little part of the spectrum missing. Okay, so then they invented LEDs about 12 years ago. And again, this is the spectral distribution for daylight on the left of your image, and on the right is one of the early versions of the LED. And you can see that a lot of the light coming out of that Kelvin CCT. And so you've seen really blue lights, some of the headlights out there. This is kind of the way that's done. Then as the lighting began to evolve, they lowered the color temperature down to, say, 5,000. So you see a difference in the spectral distribution here. It still has that blue thumb, though, that's sticking up there. That's all that blue light. That's a grow light, but it's not the kind of light you want to expose yourself to at night. And then as the lighting continued to evolve down to 4,000 Kelvin and even 3,000 Kelvin, now we have a light that doesn't give out a lot of blue light. Most of the luminance is in the warmer areas. So this is what's required in order to win the IDA certification. And then it goes down. In my home, I have 2,400 Kelvin lights. They're all in dimmers, and they're warmer. There are other options out there. This is 2,700, and you'll see, at least in some products, almost no blue thumb down there at the bottom of it. Coming to the end here. The fourth point I wanted to make is that LEDs admit for technological controls that haven't been supported previously. So there are a lot of opportunities there. One is that in a lot of communities in England and elsewhere in Europe, they're either turning them off at night or dimming them. And in England, at least in this community here, it was written up, they decided to turn them off at like 1 a.m. and the residents freaked out. And so they had to turn them back on. So then they decided what they would do is they'd dim them down to 50% gradually over a period of 15 minutes. And then no one noticed, and they're happy. Mm-hmm. So what it meant is they're saving half as much money, and they're generating half as much pollution, and it's working. And I would add that in most of our highways, automobile headlights have gotten so bright recently that they do the job, especially because the angle of illumination is perfect. You're shooting right at whatever it is you want to see, whereas a streetlight gives you just sort of, a different angle. But the studies show that up to 30 miles per hour, your headlights in the average car will do the job without any external assistance. It's only when you're really at sort of arterial or highway speed that you need some extra light. And so most of the lights we're talking about in TP are residential 30-mile-per-hour streets. Crime is an issue that's come up. I give this talk in DC a lot, and crime is raised a lot. I won't spend too much time on it, but there's a lot of evidence suggesting that lighting doesn't really help. And here, we actually examine lighting levels in eastern DC, zip code 2019, with lighting levels in the nearby Maryland zip code 20743. And what we found is that even though the lighting was a lot lower in Maryland, crime is lower too. So this idea that there's a correlate, more light means less crime, is just not true and not supported by the science. There's a famous study in Chicago in 1999 I could share with you, produced the same result. 2015 article, you can't read this, but the result was the same thing. Essentially no change in either traffic accidents or crime with reduced lighting levels. So that is my presentation. We love this dark spot on the map. Please keep it that way. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Doherty. I just want to see if my colleagues have any, if you can bear with us for just a few more minutes. Does anyone have any, while we have Mr. Doherty here? Questions?
Quick question.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah.
Where is DC on phasing in LEDs?
Oh my gosh, that saga started about 4 or 5 years ago. They put out a bid. They went through the whole bidding process. They made an award, and then one of the unsuccessful bidders challenged it. So I went into arbitration a year and a half later. It hadn't come out yet. They've changed the bid. Meanwhile, we've been pressuring them to put in smart lighting, so they've been rethinking that. And so it now appears that they're months away from putting out the final RFP. And it looks like they're going to call for smart lighting for 90% of the city. So we're gratified. Your leadership would help, I assure them.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Actually, since Mr. Doherty, since you just mentioned that on our leadership, I know you've had the opportunity to review the information that we have. Any thoughts on what our process, what we're proposing for Tacoma Park?
Well, I was shocked to hear that you have all these incandescent lights that are still out there. So, oh my, for people who care about carbon emissions, like, oh my gosh. So please do something about that. It seems like you're making efforts to run pilots and take public input. I appreciate that. I think you're ahead of DC and ahead of the other jurisdictions I'm familiar with. I would also credit the activists, as you know, have been very vocal. It's a great combination of citizen activists and legislature.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith, Sneeman, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Just looking at this map, it looks like we're not in too bad a shape right now with except for things like incandescent bulbs, but
Mercury
as
vapor.
far as the overall lighting and the dark skies perspective, we're not doing too bad.
My observation has been your brightness is pretty much in the right range out there. You also have a very well-developed tree canopy, which helps protect that. So this could be a summer picture, and in the winter it might look a lot different. I don't really know.
The other thing I would just comment on that is that considering the name of your organization, Dark Skies, I wondered if you do participate in any advocacy regarding Pepco's tree trimming policies.
That might be a different meeting.
No.
You don't need to answer that.
Because that very well could be why you're seeing dark skies over Tacoma Park. We have a very strong tree canopy, but that's being eroded, daily with the
Trees are a problem, and an equal problem is when the tree branches are underneath the light. It's not getting the job done.
Right.
Not helping.
Councilmember Kovar.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Nice to see you again.
Yeah.
You mentioned of the 4 categories that brightness was an important one. So I just want to make sure that I have this correct. So brightness is measured in watts rather than in Kelvin, which is the color, right? Or not?
Not
right?
exactly.
All right. Can you shed some
Yeah,
light?
the watts are the amount of electrical energy to go into the fixture. That's amps times volts.
Yeah.
And then, depending on what kind of light you have, you're going to have a different amount of light coming out. We measure that light coming out in lumens. And so you'll see in some of these charts that even at the same wattage, some lights may have 128 lumens, some may be only 119. So they're different, and that has to do with their efficiency. But at the end of the day, the measurement that matters the most is the illuminance. It's the foot candles that are measured on the ground. And so when we're measuring the light, we're pointing it down to see how well lit it is.
But if you reduce the wattage, will that tend to reduce that brightness?
Yeah, of course it has that
measured in
tendency.
foot candles?
And yes, for different again, different products have different efficiencies, so you might see a 30-watt luminaire that puts out more light than a 35 or different kind. But in general, less power in means less light coming out.
And typically across the same company, or if the fixtures are similar, would that be more likely?
Typically, but
Yeah.
they have curves and stuff. You'd be surprised.
So on the color, you showed one of the slides near the end, or there were two that showed the 2700 and the 3000. Actually, go back to yeah. So that shows they both have thumbs. One thumb is smaller than the other, I guess. Is that noticeable, or is that more a question of the impact that it has on some of the other aspects of the issue that you're talking about? So, in other words, would a human see that?
I was hoping you
or-
weren't going to go here.
Okay, well, sorry.
This measurement of Kelvin CCT is very crude, and real lighting engineers hate it. We actually have different ratios in the business that we call the SP ratio, much more useful. So you get different results. In this slide, there's actually two products depicted. There's the light gray and the dark one. Both of these are rated at 2700 Kelvin, but you get a different thumb profile. So that's part of the messiness of this measure.
Okay.
And so tell me again what your question was.
Well, I thought I didn't realize, I thought the less visible one was the same as the 3000 from the previous slide, but maybe I misread that.
Well, this one looks a little thummier to me.
Yeah. But so is that thumminess noticeable? That's the first time I've used that
Oh,
word.
that was your question, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a really just personal judgment and acute.
Yeah.
We all see things differently. Some of us are colorblind. It's really hard to generalize.
But would you argue that even if we can't see it, that the impact in terms of some of the other issues you mentioned, like on wildlife and so on, is there at the lower level, whether we can detect it or not?
I've
or-
seen no science distinguishing 2700 from 3000.
Okay. And the dimmers, we've talked about that, but I thought I then heard somebody from Pepco saying the technology isn't really that readily available yet. Is it readily available, the dimming technology?
Well, they've been doing it in Europe for years.
Yeah.
Again, I'm an environmental lawyer. I don't survey the market a lot,
Right.
but I know they're doing it. And I know they have motion sensors. DC is now lighting its alleys. That's silly. They should have motion sensors. So when something threatening comes in, it lights up and warns everyone. And also the lights along and in your parks, they should have motion sensors, so it's mostly dark and only comes on slowly when there's a cyclist or someone.
Okay. That's all very helpful. The only other point I wanted to make is that I think the crime piece is a little more complicated, because I don't think that the two zip codes are really identical in other ways. And I would expect that the crime rate would be lower in that other section regardless. So I didn't, that was the one piece that didn't persuade
I agree,
me.
that's a little shaky, but what I didn't show was a slide I showed previously, which is in Chicago, they decided to boost the light in certain alleys of a part of town by 200%. And they thought that would dent the crime, and in fact, crime went up by 21%. So they don't exactly know why, but they suspect that it helps the bad guys see their prey. Maybe the shadows are sharper so they can hide.
Yeah.
But it tends to cut against this theory that more light always means less crime.
And I think what I appreciated, Mr. Doherty, is when you started talking about bad lighting. I think we've had a lot of conversations about the fact that there are parts of our city that are overlit and parts that are underlit. And so, and our police chief did provide some
Yep.
useful information on this point.
Okay,
I'm going
thank
to
you.
turn it now to Councilwoman Kostick, and then Councilwoman DeBala has a question.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. One of the things that struck me the most was that slide where the hand is over the light, and you can't see the person in the first slide, and then you can't, or in the first picture, and then you can in the other. That was a really interesting aspect, showing the shielding impact. One of the things I've learned during this process.
My eyes will do a lot better if I could do this right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we feel that way too sometimes. So one of the things I've learned in this process is that throughout the city, the distribution of our streetlights in terms of how many streetlights there are on, whether it's on every pole or every other pole or every 3 poles, is not consistent. So it seems to me that you would need to have, if you have a light on every 3 poles, you would need to have a brighter light in order to have an adequate lighting of the entire area. Would your recommendation be to have more frequent lights but at a lower brightness level versus fewer lights but at a brighter level? And is it accurate that you would need a brighter light if you have fewer of them?
Well, ideally, you just take out all the poles and then put in new ones that were perfectly spaced in the perfect height.
Yeah, you get
with the
Pepco to
proper
do
light.
that, and then like.
Yeah, but books have been written about poles. I mean, they were mostly put in for carrying electrical wires. Then they decided to put lights on them, and so it's harem scarum. Basically, you want people who are skilled in this, either lighting engineers or skilled technicians, to make the judgment based on the height, the distance, and at the end of the day, you're using a luminance meter to make sure the amount of light there is right. And so you can't really say 3 times on this or 3 times on the rest. Just get it as close to perfect as you can on the ground.
So am I understanding right that if you had an LED light on one pole that needed to light a larger area, it would probably be brighter for you standing right under that pole than it would be for a light that lit a smaller area? Would that just be a natural feature, or does it not work that way?
Every light on the market will have a spec sheet that shows the lighting pattern underneath
Okay.
it. And it's usually like that shape, and they're concentric rings of different brightness levels.
Okay.
And then they'll have a spec sheet they put in shields, and they can sort of block the light from going behind the lamp or other things. So all these things can be controlled, and that's what the technicians need to decide.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my other question is there a place relatively nearby where we could see a sample of, I mean, I know there are places in Arizona and California and Seattle that have done various replacements of streetlights. Are there places that you've seen relatively close by that have done something similar that you think is good or bad?
I wish. The Big Island of Hawaii, I recommend a road trip.
All
for
right.
council. They're
You said
really
it.
doing
There you go.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And this does remind me, and I'll put in a plug and we'll get more details on this, that we are doing on Monday night a tour of the streetlights that have been put in. I'm going to go to Councilwoman DeBala because she's on the phone and been waiting patiently.
Yes, thank you. So I'm down for the trip to Hawaii. Very fun. But quite seriously, I wanted to return to the subject of shielding just a bit. You showed a couple of schematics of shielding, and so is my understanding correct, number one, that the LEDs that have shields, pretty much all of them will block light from going into people's bedrooms' windows, which is what we have now? And secondly, are there adjustments to the shielding that the technicians can do to line up the lights on the sidewalks and the streets so that the light is directed where we want it and not where we don't want it?
Yes, one thing that's different about LEDs is the light is inherently directional. It sort of goes that way, sort of comes down. Now, it's not perfect,
Right.
but an incandescent bulb it just goes everywhere, and you need reflectors to control the light. But an LED pretty much goes that way, but there will be a splash. And as I said, you can see the light output distribution shapes that come with the product, and it'll tell you how long and how wide the field is. Then they'll have a diagram that shows how the light is distributed with shields. Sometimes they put grids over, sometimes and then you can see how that's done. So in every case, they should be able to shield it so it's completely satisfactory.
Great. Councilwoman Searcy, last question.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the presentation. It's been really, really enlightening. Pardon the pun.
It's been used before.
So I want to make sure that I understand the dark sky recommended best practices in terms of LED lighting scheme. And so what I've heard you say is, 3,000 Kelvin is the highest you all would recommend.
Correct.
Is that correct? And then the shielding, that was wonderful in terms of the visuals that you provided, in terms of the types of shields and the angle in which you all would recommend. And you said, okay, it could be, less 75%, right?
Yeah, but that's sort of for an incandescent or one of these sodium. When you have a directional LED, the analysis is a little different. And you'll, again, on the spec sheet, it'll show you how the light is distributed.
And so one piece that I'm still trying to make sure I understand are the lumens and the foot candles.
It's
So
the most important point. Number one is brightness. That's the most important thing.
So is there, do you all have a recommended number of foot candles or lumens that we should strive for? I'm still trying to wait for that wattage number, 35, you know, so is there a specific?
Well, let's not
foot
focus on
candle?
watts. as I
Okay.
said. Watts is coming up the pole.
Okay,
And then lumens are being generated, that's the amount of light coming out. What matters is the amount of light on the ground.
on the ground.
It's called illuminance, and that's how they measure that there, and that's the bottom line. And there are standards for that. There
Okay.
are not standards for the other things.
And so so for the standards for the foot candles, like does Dark Sky, do you all have recommendations for that? Or is that something that is really more or less set by?
It's set by the engineers. As I
Okay.
said, the AASHTO has standards, the IES, the Illumination Engineering Society. And it's not that simple. Small residential streets require less illuminance than interstate highways or arterials. So they have books and codes, and that's above my pay grade.
No, that's actually leads to the next question. So as Councilmember Kosick mentioned, there are a number of parts of the city that actually have poles that are further apart. There are also areas of the city that directly abut like a commercial district. So you will have likely LED lighting from the businesses in addition to any new LED lights on the main highways as well as residential streets. So in terms of the lumen, no, not the lumen. In terms of, I'm trying to keep it straight in my head. In terms of the Kelvin, does Dark Sky recommend sticking with the 3,000 when you're talking about a commercial area?
Yes.
Okay. And that would be true for state highways as well?
Yeah.
Okay. And so has there been any other discussions that you all might have had, perhaps with the Maryland State Highway Association or any of the other, have you done any work like on other major highways in terms of LED light standard discussions? I'm just trying to make sure that, you know, we don't run into problems given that we're talking about state
We've done a
highways.
lot of work over the years with the technical agencies, AASHTO and IES.
Okay.
And we're on joint committees. And they helped us reach the 3,000 Kelvin recommendation.
Okay.
You know, there's parking lots, there's airports, there's all sorts of different applications. It's rocket science.
Yeah, yeah.
You know. But I will say this, when I was waiting to come over here, I stood by the 7-Eleven over by the subway, and I looked up, and there was a drop lens Cobra, high pressure sodium, and then there's a flat lens Cobra, Mercury something, and then the 7-Eleven had these really bluish LEDs that were overdone, and it's just like potpourri of stuff, you know.
Yes. Welcome to Tacoma Park.
Let's
No,
wrap it.
that's DC. That is DC. That is not us.
This is the
That is
old,
DC.
oh, that's still in DC.
That
Oh,
is
okay.
DC.
It's all the same to me.
Yeah. You can go tell Muriel that.
I'm on it.
I'm thinking about my area. I have LED lights on businesses and then the mixed
You can see
use.
my street. I have 5 different types of light, and one is held together with by duct tape right now. So,
Come visit Ward 4, you'll love it.
all right, Mr. Doherty, I just want to say,
I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure that I understood your recommendation to Councilmember Searcy. For the commercial areas, you recommend the 3,000 K or below. Not. Are you saying that 3,000 K is better than 25 or 2,700 K in the commercial areas? And if so, why is that?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Mr. Doherty, we really appreciate, and we know that you are an environmental lawyer, and we pushed you on maybe in some areas, and we very much appreciate you
Thank you.
taking the time this evening to answer our questions. I think this has been really helpful as we continue this, and thank you very much.
Certainly welcome.
All right. Our next presentation this evening will be nicely a report on Tacoma Park's energy efficiency efforts by our sustainability manager, Gina Mathias.
Hi. I am going to start with just a quick refresher that in 2014, the city adopted the Sustainable Energy Action Plan to help the city reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. And it's my primary job focus to implement that plan. And since 2014, we've implemented over half of the 17 key strategies in that plan. So we're due for an update. Yeah, it's a big deal. Last year in FY18, the focus was on our car-free challenge, working on transportation-related emissions, and there was a very large emphasis on our low to moderate income single-family homes energy efficiency. We had a large grant from the Maryland Energy Administration, and we were able to give 9 homeowners complete energy makeovers. Each homeowner received an average of $5,500 worth of improvements to their homes, which included air sealing, insulation, HVAC upgrades, and some appliances, which is saving them about $500 a year in utility costs, which is a very big deal. And it's about 2,000 kilowatt hours a year in savings per home. So in total, that program has the impact of 15,000 pounds of coal not being burned, or 34,000 miles not being driven by a car. We also participated in the Montgomery County Solar Co-op again, and we plan to participate in every solar co-op that comes our way and slowly keep increasing solar installations in the city. And we also helped to host the 4th annual Montgomery County Green Fest, right over the border of Tacoma Park at Jessup Blair Park. That will probably be the last Montgomery County Green Fest that we help host, since they have decided to combine with the Brookside Gardens Earth Day Festival. So sad to see it go, but a lot less work for me, which means that I can focus more on greenhouse gas emissions strategies. Lastly, in FY18, we updated our inventory. So this is very important for us to update our inventory. Recommendations range from every 2 to 3 years. We're doing every 3 years. So our last inventory was updated in 2012. And in your packets, you should have a copy of the report. If you don't raise your hand, I have extra copies with me. We saw a slight increase in our inventory, about 2%. But when the contractors worked with us and they looked at the heating degree days and the cooling degree days, basically how hot and cold 2015 was versus 2012, and adjusted for that, we saw mostly decreases in our energy intensity use per heating degree, per cooling degree day. So overall, through the inventory process, I think we're doing pretty good, and it showed the efficacy of many of our programs, including in residential energy efficiency, which was a large focus of the past 4 years for us. The biggest improvements came in municipal energy use. Even with the hotter and colder weather, we saw reductions in our municipal energy use. That's due to all of the improvements made to the Recreation Center, Hefner Park, this building, and overall efforts there. One of the major things that came out of working with the Brendel Group to update our greenhouse gas inventory is a pathway forward for our next inventory. It's time-consuming and expensive to do our greenhouse gas inventories, and MWCOG does inventories. They've been working for the past several years to make the regional greenhouse gas inventory that they provide more accurate and scalable for the municipalities that are members of COG. Brendel gave me some outlines on how we can work with COG to do our inventory, and their recommendation is that we do that, that we work with MWCOG in the future on our inventories. So I plan to do that. I've attended trainings at COG on doing the inventory with them, and I'm working with staff at COG on Brendel's recommendations for our data collection. There are some things that COG collects and assigns to Tacoma Park that don't really relate to what we did in our inventory. Some of those things that we will work with COG to not put in Tacoma Park's inventory are things like liquefied petroleum gas, commercial fuel oil, passenger air travel, off-road mobile emissions. We don't really have a lot of off-road vehicles here. Manure management, that's one we don't need to include. Agriculture, hydrofluorocarbons, and natural gas fugitive emissions. So I have a good roadmap for our next inventory that will be for this year, 2018. We'll take care of that in 2019. So moving to 2019, FY19, the major focus for our greenhouse gas emission strategies right now are working on increasing the adoption of renewable energy. And as you are all aware, we just officially concluded our Renewable Energy Challenge, but I've talked to Clean Choice and we are extending that challenge through December 31st. What that means is residents and businesses can still sign up with Clean Choice and get that reduced rate. They've also confirmed that they will maintain their margins upon renewal. So anybody who signed up throughout the campaign will still be getting a discount when they renew. The overall price might go up or down, but they have committed to maintaining their margin. So far in that campaign, we've seen 145 new subscribers to renewable energy through Clean Choice. I don't have data from the other providers like WGL. I estimate with the other companies, we now have 12 to 15% of all electric accounts in the city getting renewable energy. So I think that's great. It's over 50% improvement. And so I'm hoping to get to our 25% by December 31st. The other big effort this year will be in multifamily energy efficiency. So in previous years, we've given multifamily buildings grants to do energy efficiency projects. Those have been very successful, but we've heard from community experts that working on just a one-time implementation of an energy efficiency measure doesn't yield consistent savings year after year, that those savings degrade over time. And so we're going to take a new approach to work at monitoring and optimization programs with some key buildings in Tacoma Park. I'll be issuing an RFP soon. I have some target organizations I think would be ideal to work on monitoring and optimization with us. And the goal would be to yield significant sustained savings over time with the multifamily buildings. That's it on the update. We'll be working on updating our energy action plan, looking at where we are and what we should be focusing on next now that we have implemented so much of it. And for Energy Awareness Month that we have a proclamation for, I have 3 events to announce. So during the entire month of October, starting on October 5th, the proclaimed Energy Efficiency Day, residents can come to Public Works during business hours and exchange 2 light bulbs for brand new LEDs. You can bring in incandescents or CFLs and get brand new LEDs that are warm white and either 40 or 60 watt equivalents. No repeat customers, supplies are limited. First come, first served. Second, Montgomery County Department of Environmental Protection is also hosting a variety of Energy Awareness Month activities. One of them is at the Long Branch Senior Center on Piney Branch Road. And that's going to be on October 15th from 11 to 12. It's a presentation, an interactive presentation. And people who come to that presentation will receive energy efficiency measures to take home with them. And then lastly, just after Energy Efficiency Month ends, low to moderate income seniors or homebound residents can participate to get energy efficiency measures installed. And this is running through the Montgomery County Aging and Disability Services. So anybody who would like to have caulking around doors and windows, installation of plastic film on windows, weather stripping, bathroom faucet or kitchen faucet aerators, glass patches on cracked windows, can contact me and I will get them signed up for that service.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the update. Does anyone on council have any questions or comments?
I just was wondering, could you write out briefly some of those great announcements of the events? Because I would love to send those to residents in my weekly update.
Absolutely. I have it written up and I was planning to post publicly tomorrow. So I'll make sure you're copied when that goes live.
Thank you.
Great. Councilmember Kovar.
Oh, thanks. Yes, just 2 questions. On the chart that shows the solid waste, I'm not sure there's a page number on it. So it looks like that's stayed mostly the same with just a slight improvement, I think because of the composting, it looks like. Is that right, where it says food waste?
There was a small improvement due to food waste, but the largest difference was between taking Tacoma Park's trash to the incineration facility and moving it to the landfill. And at the landfill, there were changes in emissions because the landfill captures and uses electricity for generation there. So that was a significant difference.
But just in terms of, is the recycling number, I mean, have we gotten as far as we can get on recycling, would you say?
No, we can always do better on recycling. It's just very tricky.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if there are thoughts about that, let us know. The only other question is, you talked about how the emissions went up a little bit based on hotter and colder weather, I guess, right? So what are the steps we should take, assuming that kind of thing could continue to occur? What are the steps to address that?
We need to continue pushing energy efficiency. Because we've made good steps doesn't mean we should stop. We need to continue prioritizing energy efficiency programs, continue incentivizing it. Incentive programs get stale. People hear about it and start to ignore it, just like the PEPCO incentive programs for energy efficiency. So we need to continually improve and innovate on those programs so that we get more gains in energy efficiency.
So you mentioned solar. So how much of it is make fossil fuel generated energy more efficient, which you were just talking about, versus increasing the use of renewable? And I assume both those things have to happen, but is it the second one that really offers the longer term benefits?
I think the efficiency is the easy near term, and the long term is getting rid of fossil fuels entirely. We need to phase them out. When people's furnaces go bad, we should be electrifying and focusing on renewable energy, things like that. So, and we need to encourage and make it easier for people to adopt renewable energy in Tacoma Park.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman DeBala?
Yes, hi, Gina. This is great information and this is great progress. But I want to echo your statement that progress is great, but we're not done. We're not done at all. And I wanted to specifically ask you a couple of things. One is, what can we do, as council members, to promote the extended renewable energy challenge? Can you send us some things that we can send out, for example? And along those lines, renters who pay their own electricity bills are eligible, right? It's not just single-family homes, correct?
Correct. Anybody with a PEPCO account in the city, residential, apartments, condos, and businesses can all participate in the Renewable Energy Challenge and get a special rate from Clean Choice. And I'm happy to send out some blurbs that you can copy and paste to make it very easy.
If we haven't, as a city, reached out to businesses specifically through the business associations, I think we should. Why would I be surprised? Not surprised to hear you've already done it, but if we haven't, that would be another area to focus on.
Absolutely. I know Clean Choice had a representative soliciting businesses, but I have not personally done much outreach to the businesses.
Okay, and Councilmember Tostic asked for some information on the other programs that we can circulate. And would you like to say any more about, I think the multifamily programs are great. Would you like to say any more about what you would like to do in the spring to follow up on that, or have you got enough to do?
On multifamily, what I want to follow up on?
Yeah, if there is anything that you
I can elaborate a little bit more. So once an award is made, the idea is that a selected number of buildings that are interested would receive a level 2 ASHRAE audit from a qualified contractor, and based on the results of that audit, we'll select 2 or 3 buildings to receive improvement measures. And those improvement measures will include continuing monitoring and optimization of those systems. The buildings that participate and receive the audit will benefit from the information they get. So even if they're not selected for the improvement projects, they'll still have that information and a roadmap of ways that they can improve their building.
Great. Thank you. Councilwoman Searcy?
Thank you so much, one, for all of the hard work that you're doing, and two, for extending the clean energy program. I was
Yeah.
at a neighborhood meeting last night, and they asked, Alicia, can it be extended? And so I'm happy to be able to report to New Hampshire Gardens residents, it has been. So a couple of quick points. One, I just want to ask that for some of the financial considerations related to these kinds of programs in the future, that we make sure that we include cost savings from the prior year. It's sometimes helpful to see, especially as it relates to any energy savings that the municipal building has experienced, for residents to kind of see that balance. Like, we have some cost savings because of our energy efficiency programs and what we're implementing, and it costs something, right? So it kind of helps people to kind of see the balance. The one point that was raised, and I believe it was raised when we were first talking about the clean energy program, is the need for additional information for residents who are often bombarded with energy providers who are calling them or sending them things in the mail, wanting them to sign up for something. And so in many cases, it can result in information paralysis. Like, you don't want to do anything because you're being bombarded with so many things. Is it possible to create, I understand that rates change and things, but like an information page to try to help residents decipher like clean energy, or this clean energy initiative, and how it compares to perhaps current PEPCO rates or some other, energy provider that they may, or supplier that they may constantly call them. I think that would be something that would be really helpful for us to kind of consider ways of not just talking about the program and amping up the program, but really trying to help residents to decipher amongst all of the different information that they receive regularly. And another point that was raised about those residents who are renters, or perhaps some of our lower income residents, when we are considering programming, particularly for something like the Clean Energy Challenge, where it's wonderful, it's a great program, but it is actually more expensive than getting your current supply from PEPCO. And so, like, maybe acknowledging that it's a little bit more expensive, and we can perhaps offer for those residents that we're trying to target, if we could come up with some rebate program or something where you sign up, we give you a little something, at least try to make up that gap for you, that would create these incentives for many lower income residents who might be interested but can't pay for it. Yeah.
So, yeah, I love your questions because we've done both.
Okay, awesome.
So I do have on the Renewable Energy Challenge webpage on the city website an FAQ that has a whole slew of questions about contract terms, other providers, what kind of cost increase people can expect. And if there's questions missing from that you're getting, please let me know. Also, residents can call me and email me anytime with specific questions. I'm very happy to talk them through the whole process. We also have a rebate for low to moderate income residents. The same qualifications apply from our low to moderate income energy efficiency grant from the MEA, and residents will get $100 to $120 in rebate money from Clean Choice, not the city, but from Clean Choice at the end of their 12 months of being a subscriber to Clean Choice.
Okay.
But I have also heard anecdotally that if somebody calls Clean Choice and lets them know that they're low income, they can get a rate comparable to PEPCO. So either way, we're working with low income residents to help it be more affordable for them.
And so those residents would be able to, when they sign up, is that something that would automatically happen, or would they have to go through?
They
us at
have
all?
to give me their application because I will be the keeper of the low to moderate income qualified list, and I will let Clean Choice know these people are qualified. So Clean Choice isn't getting their financial information. Clean Choice isn't holding that. I use the same process we use for the MEA grant.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Don't you love it when you already have things done? Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Gina, for your report. Appreciate it. Thank you for all your hard work on this. Couple questions regarding Clean Choice. One of the apartment buildings in the city, Essex House, those residents pay their electrical bill through a third party. Does Clean Choice offer the same type of programs if you're using a company like Studebaker?
I don't know, and I have had a conversation with some other staff members in the Housing and Community Development Department about Essex House and the Studebaker issue, because residents are experiencing bills that are higher than what you would expect for an apartment. And that is a question I haven't gotten answered yet, is if, one, Essex House, their contract with Studebaker, can it be broken? How long is it for? And then two is if Clean Choice can step in and offer a better rate than what they're getting from Studebaker. My guess is they cannot, because Studebaker is likely offering a standard offer product, which is probably going to be much cheaper because it's traditional energy mix, including coal and nuclear and gas. So it's just going to be cheaper than the renewable. But it is worth the question and worth a look at.
Yeah, could you follow up with them, because
Yeah.
this has just been an ongoing problem and residents have not been able to find a solution. And you know, these electric bills, some of them are really, really high, and some apartment buildings where you live in a 1-bedroom, it seems to be higher than sometimes a 2-bedroom. So you know, there's no rhyme or reason, and Studebaker really works for the landlord, CPDC. So CPDC is the one that's calling the shots behind this, and residents aren't able to talk to Studebaker unless they get approval from CPDC about their bills. So it's a huge problem. The only way I think you can resolve it is through help from staff, and if you could get involved, that'd be great.
Yeah, and if there's a resident who's having a particularly high electric bill, please feel free to put them in contact with me. I'm happy to analyze a year of their bills and walk through their apartment with them and see if there's anything physically going on that we could identify leading to a high bill. I'm sure they've already done that, but if they haven't, I'm happy to serve as that energy coach. That's one of my functions.
Oh, wow, I like that. In your report, you talked about the use of cars, right, being one of the things that if we use fewer of them, then the amount of energy that we produce would go down. Have you thought about an autonomous car pilot to be done in this?
I have not.
Have you looked at any other municipalities and see how that has impacted their use of energy?
It depends on how you run it. So I have read a couple of reports. I can't remember what city it is that's instituting an electric autonomous shuttle. And I thought that was very interesting because as a shuttle, they're getting about 27 riders a day. I don't know if that evens out to be better energy-wise or worse energy-wise if the shuttle's running continuously throughout the day, rather than individual riders, individual cars on the road that are autonomous. There's concerns that the individual cars on the road are going to use just as much energy as what is currently used. So I haven't looked at it. It's not something I think I know enough about yet to be the first to do an autonomous pilot here, but maybe with some help from somebody in planning.
Great.
All right, I just think it's coming, you know, just a matter of
Yeah.
if it's 2 years, 5 years down the road, and it'd be nice if we could lead on it. Thank you.
Get our streetlights done first. And then we'll take on autonomous cars.
I just wanted to clarify. You talked about the Council of Governments data. Can you tell other than the fact that it's very similar to the ones we've been doing, what are the advantages for us of going with the COG data?
Yeah, there are two main advantages. One is staff time. So if we're doing the COG data, they are able to collect regional data, and there's only a couple of data sources that I'll have to collect. And then two is money. We will not have to pay a consulting firm. This year we spent $10,000 on the greenhouse gas inventory update, And that was quite a deal we got from the Brendel Group because they had done our previous one. In future years, we would want to go out to bid and find a new consulting firm or ensure that Brendel is still the best fit for us. And I expect, based on Brendel's feedback, we would have to pay quite a bit more.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, as always. It's wonderful to have you come and report at the meeting. We learn so much, and thank you for being here.
Yeah.
All right, now we'll move on to our voting portion of the meeting. First, we'll have public comments on voting item. The first is the second reading ordinance approving traffic calming for Hilltop Road between Geneva Avenue and Mississippi Avenue. Any public comments on that? Seeing none, we'll move to our second voting item, a second reading ordinance approving payment in lieu of taxes agreement for 126 and 128 Lee Avenue. Any public comments on that? No? All right. Next, we have I know there's going to be a lot of comments on this one. Single reading ordinance approving purchase of Dobie licenses. Any public comments on that? All right. Seeing none, we'll move to, I know, right there. All right. We will move to our voting session. The first item is second reading ordinance approving traffic calming for Hilltop Road between Geneva Avenue and Mississippi Avenue. This is a second reading. Would someone like to move the ordinance?
So moved.
Councilmember Siemens moved. Do I have a second? Second. Councilmember Smith, any discussion? Comments? Councilwoman Caustic.
I think Councilmember Siemens beat
Did you
me.
go first?
If you'd like to go ahead.
No.
You can. All right. So I have a couple of questions. As we talked about previously, I think we need to move away from speed bumps in general, and I think we need to look at our process overall and move towards a more holistic and data-driven process. I think it's really great that we had the data that was presented to us, the traffic counts at our last meeting, and that was extremely helpful. What I keep coming back to, though, is that I feel like it's really difficult to put the data into context because we just don't have comparison figures for other streets or for, I don't even know if there is sort of a national standard or a state standard or a regional standard for what is an appropriate speed level or traffic volume on certain types of streets. It's just really difficult to put it into context. So I feel like when these requests come in, it's sort of us just looking at residents who have said, we want traffic calming, we want speed bumps, and then it's really difficult for us to judge that and to look at it in comparison to what else we could be doing with those funds or where there might be a greater or lesser need for traffic calming. So one of the questions I had, I don't recall seeing anything further. One of the questions I had asked the chief if it were possible to, I know he was looking into if it were possible to get further data on, and I assume he might not have been able to do it.
We weren't able to get it from the time that you asked.
Yeah, and I apologize. I asked late this afternoon. But one of the things I was looking at was that the on the speed counts, it shows 52% going one direction and 41% going the other direction of the cars were speeding, which is a significant number compared to some of the other data that we've seen. But it shows a mean exceeding at 28 miles per hour, which is not in and of itself, I think, a whole lot more than 25 miles per hour or unanticipated. So one of the things I was curious about was there an average above 30 miles per hour and how many cars were going over that? I think those are the sorts of questions we should be looking at as we move forward. And I know I discussed at the previous time when this information came up that I would like to see us create some sort of master plan throughout the city and have traffic counts on various roads throughout the city so that we can really compare these things. Looking at the specific ordinance here, the first section says, or the second section, section 2, that staff will evaluate the effectiveness of the measures and if they do not sufficiently slow traffic. So my question was, do we have a sort of, and it doesn't have to be specifically defined, but what do we define as sufficiently slowing traffic?
So what we looked at and what we responded to some inquiries by email is the 85th percentile is the normal comparison. So we would be looking at that. Now, if it's down one thing, you know, one small thing, is that enough? It may need to be a judgment call, but I think it'll be pretty clear about whatever the 85th percentile counts are. And, you know, if it were very close or something, it may be something that we want to bring back to you to talk about.
So what I would like to propose is an amendment to that second section. It currently says, if the measures do not sufficiently slow traffic, the city manager will notify the council of the results and schedule installation of a speed hump. I would like to propose that we say, we'll notify the council of the results and seek direction on the installation of a speed hump.
Do I have a second for the amendment? I'll second it. Sorry. We have to ask Councilmember Siemens if he's okay with it because he moved the motion.
No, I, at this point, would oppose that. I certainly appreciate your interest in kind of regularizing the process and being a little more scientific in our approach and strategic in the way that we do install new speed bumps. My concern is that this is something that's in process and has been moving along following the rules that are in place today, and we're talking about one speed bump. So I would certainly support your suggestion that we do start talking now while there are not other speed bumps in process to think about how we want to do it in the future. But I would like to just move forward with this as we have the resolution written today.
So can I ask the city manager, as it is written now, what is your intention? It says that you would inform us of the results, and you would conclude based on your own judgment.
My anticipation was that that we would notify you of the results if it looked like the traffic was still moving along at a higher level. Then having this language which allows us to schedule a speed hump means that we don't have to go through, you know, come back and go through a resolution or ordinance process to do that, to get that okay. So it certainly could be something where you could say, you know, we've changed our mind, we really don't want a speed hump. There's that option. But this allows us to save some time if it looks like we would move forward. So that's my interpretation of it.
That's sort of what I was getting at with my proposed amendment, was that my preference would be that you come back to us and say, you know, the change has been to 28.5 miles per hour from 29.1. Therefore, I recommend going ahead with a speed bump. And we would say, yes, we think that's great, or no, we don't. That would be my reason for proposing the amendment.
I guess my feeling on this is that the process that we have in place is very much a petition process. There's very little judgment that's allowed. It's really a deference to the sense of a community about an impact. And that's how council has wanted it for a long time. So that's, as Councilmember Siemens mentioned, that's how the process was followed. We're not hard and fast. We'd like to come back and consult with you. So I'm just letting you know it's a little bit, I can go whichever way the council wishes to go on this one.
Sound like a city manager.
Thank you.
So Councilman Costick, do you want to keep the amendment on the table? Or
I would still like to propose it, yes.
All right, all those in favor of the amended language, please raise your hand. All those opposed? All right, the amendment goes down. Any other discussion of the ordinance?
Can I add one more thing?
Yep.
If we do put in speed bumps there, I would like to ask that we follow up, since we have this data here, with a traffic count after the speed bumps are put in, so that we have some way to say, look, this is how effective a speed bump is or isn't.
On that particular street?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be there, but I think we should look for opportunities to do that.
Oh, I would support that. In fact, I think it should be there because we've done the measurements before any traffic calming. We're doing them after we do some softer traffic calming. And then it would be nice to do it after the speed bump is put in to see
if it's put
which
in.
of our, which of our traffic calming measures are effective.
All right, so this is an amendment moving forward, which would say,
I'm sorry, I didn't intend to amend anything. I'm
Okay.
just asking
It's
that
just-
as we
it's
move
just
forward,
some-
I'd like to.
You're just gonna
do
do
that,
it. You're
yes.
just gonna know you're gonna
I
do
think
it.
we
Where's
can
Daryl?
follow.
You're
Yeah,
gonna
we
know
can
you're
do
gonna do it. Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
Your verbal head nod. All right, Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you for your support.
All right. Since this is the second reading of the ordinance, will the clerk, will the clerk please call the roll? Yes.
Councilmember Kovar? Yes. Councilmember DeBala? Councilmember Costick?
Yes.
DeBala's a yes, Costick is a no. You got it? Okay.
Councilmember Siemens?
Aye.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy?
Okay. Second reading ordinance approving payment in lieu of taxes agreement for 126 and 128 Lee Avenue. This is second reading. I don't believe there was any changes from the first reading. Would someone like to move it?
I'd like to move it.
Councilmember Siemens, do I have a second? Second. Councilmember Smith, any discussion? This is a second reading ordinance. Will the clerk call the roll?
Mayor Stewart?
Yes.
Councilmember Kovar? Councilmember DeBala?
Yes.
Councilmember Costick?
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens?
Aye.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy?
Yes.
All right, next is single reading ordinance approving purchase of Adobe licenses. Would someone like to move this? Councilwoman Costick, second.
Second.
Councilman Siemens, any discussion?
May I use them?
All right, this is a single reading ordinance. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes.
Councilmember Kovar? Councilmember DeBala?
Yes.
Councilmember Costick?
Yes.
Councilmember Siemens?
Aye.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Searcy?
All right, now we open it up for public comments on other topics this evening. If you'd like to speak, please go to the podium, and you have 3 minutes. Please state your name and where you live.
Hi, my name is Charlotte Shoneman, and I represent Tacoma Park Dark Sky Keepers. I live in Ward 3 on Eastern Avenue. I wanted to thank the council for allowing so much citizen participation in this. I'm looking forward to coming to like a really good solution to the lighting situation. And I just heard some things tonight that I thought didn't really achieve a lot of clarity. So I just wanted to bring some of my knowledge about lights to the table. The first one's about shielding. So I think IDA recommends full shielding. And shielding can mean so many different things, and different people were throwing it out as a vocabulary word, but we weren't, I don't think, on the same page. So, for example, people talked about the lights getting in their eyes. These are fully shielded lights, and they're just not shielded adequately to keep it out of our eyes. And so that's a really good example of how a light can be fully shielded, and it's IDA compliant because it's fully shielded, but it can still be shining in my eyes or in my home, or it can be blinding so that I can't see what's happening in the bushes. And sorry, Councilmember DeBala, I think, brought that up, and she can't see what I'm talking about. So, Cindy, I'll have to show you some other time. Councilmember Costick mentioned about would it be more effective to have more dim lights, and would you need a brighter light if you only had like one light every 3 poles? Yes. I think that's generally considered to be true. You'd have to have brighter lights if they were farther apart, and for many reasons that would be less desirable. Like ideally you would have lots of little lights kind of low down so that they would be essentially task lighting. It's just not practical. Like it's more cost effective to have fewer lights that are brighter, and so we need to find a balance. And the last thing was Councilmember Searcy asked about, is it better to have brighter lights near like brighter areas like Langley Park, for example? And my reading has shown yes, that one really important thing that I've learned about light is it's entirely relative. And as Councilmember Costick said, the best slide was the one where the hand was here. You can see how relative light is, that it's not.
Thank you, Ms. Jones.
Yeah.
That's it. Time's up. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other public, Mr. Lovelace, go ahead.
Okay, this is Pat Lovelace, your official speech delegate. I want to remind you that about the parking and the car chargers at Tacoma Park. I'd like to make sure that they're all maintained quickly and best as possible. Because I heard that somebody has been checking around this area, and some of the car chargers, he can't charge his car because he likes to go over to the library sometimes or the meeting or whatever and just charge his car. And the charger isn't working a lot of times. I brought this up before with the recess, so I want to make sure that's being taken care of. Another thing is don't become a friend of ICE. We ought to put out a resolution demanding our policemen not to take part in any of these raids they're having on the immigrants, because we're a sanctuary city and we got to do everything we can to practice our sanctuarity. So please don't support ICE in any manner, shape, or form. They're not our friend. So anyway, another thing too is October 21st, they're having the Women's March on the Pentagon, starting at Pentagon City on at 11 a.m. A gathering at the Pentagon City Metro, and we're marching at 12 o'clock to the Pentagon. Because if war is not a women's issue, what the hell is? Women bring us into the world. Women raise us and take care of us. They nurture us. And they have to see their offspring going off to war and coming back in pieces, or coming back in a body bag, or coming back with their minds destroyed or crippled. It's not fair. It's not right. It is a women's issue. So please come on down and support us, because the war has come home to the hood and also come home to the home because of the domestic violence going on and the sexual attacks going on our bike paths and stuff and in our parks. We cannot allow this to go on one day longer. So come on out and support us. Please support us. And if you're all upset over the nomination of whoever it is, come on out and call your congressman and tell him to vote with a conscience. Vote with a damn conscience, for God's sakes. So please get out there and do your American duty. Take part in the American system. Talk to your congressman about issues you're concerned about. Do what we can about gun control. And please support the Women's March on the Pentagon. There'll be a lot of those issues coming up. So please,
Thank you, Mr.
come on
Lovelace.
up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Love it, love it, love it.
It's short. Arthur David Olson, Hancock Avenue. The Commemoration Commission has proposed a historic marker about street names at the corner of Lee and Hancock. While that is a place where we've decided to continue honoring two Confederate generals, there's substantially more foot traffic at Lee and Maple. If we're only going to have one marker, it would have more educational value there. As it happens, there are only 2 street signs on the entire length of Lee Avenue, at Maple and at Hancock. It would not be prohibitively expensive to have markers by all the Lee Avenue signs. I hope the council and commission will consider that possibility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Wayne Sherwood. I live on Grant Avenue. I'm here to say a few words about the housing component of the strategic plan, which you're going to be discussing tonight. And I think I walked in and heard the mayor say it's also going to be discussed on a Monday later in
Monday, and we have one other work session. So
at another work
at least
session.
3 meetings on this.
Well, that's great. It's a far cry. It's a totally different level of discussion than when I know the City Council spends a lot of time on speed bumps and traffic calming measures and how bright the lights are. And those are things that are very, very important to a lot of people. But sometimes also in our preoccupation with the immediate and the small and the local, we kind of lose sight sometimes of the larger trends and things that are occurring in our society and in our region and in our community. So I'm glad that the strategic plan is going to be out there, and I think that we're facing a lot of challenges in this area, and a lot of the challenges have been documented in the documents that have been put before. But now it's up to the council to try and reiterate what are the most important priorities for the city and why, and to try to see whether or not the city has the resources and the staff to address some of those things. I think it's often the case that at the local level, people say, well, there's nothing we can do about these things. I mean, what happens with the Purple Line is way beyond our ability to affect, or the trends in housing prices in the region are way beyond our ability. There's nothing we can do. It's the private market that's doing this, and on and on. And a lot of that is true, but there are some things that I think that the City of Council, the City of Tacoma Park can do. And I've sent something out as to the council members that has a list of priorities, I think. But a lot of times you think, well, those things aren't really going to happen. But I know from my experience in Seattle and in Portland, I've watched things that have happened at the rapid light rail going through Seattle and my home city of Portland, and it has major impacts. And those things come along, and then afterwards people say, oh, why didn't we see what was going to happen here? And we should have been able to do something. And it's not true that we can stop everything, but if we like the list of things that I put down here on my chart, I would just really hope that you could prioritize. The worst thing you can do is just tell the city staff, oh, we've got all these things, we sure hope you can do something about all these things, and then not increase the staff levels or something. So we have to figure out how we do it, and that's it. That's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sherwood.
Good evening. My name is Cynthia Mariel. Actually, I have a question this evening. When I attended a September City Council meeting at which the PEPFAR representatives were present to talk about the proposed lighting changes here in Tacoma Park, there was a woman, I'm sorry, I forget her name, from PEPCO, who presented her information. And what I thought I heard, but I would like clarification to see if my ears were hearing accurately, is I thought she referenced that the light bulbs for this Tacoma Park project had already been purchased by PEPCO. Could you clarify if that is the case? Thank you.
Yeah, the city manager can clarify.
Yes, that's correct. And that has been, they had been following the direction of the city council. Nevertheless, the council will be going through on a tour to see a variety of options as well, and we have a couple of different test fixtures that we're going to be looking at. I'll give some information on that in just a few minutes.
Yeah. I'm sorry, with the sustainability, just so because it's an issue, I want to make sure we are offering
completely accurate
information.
If I'm understanding your question, it was whether PEPCO has already purchased the retrofit lights. They have not. But they have gone out to bid,
right.
And they have selected a fixture and gone through their
sorry, I didn't mean
procurement
to
process.
misspeak.
They have not purchased them. They have not spent money. They're waiting for a decision from the city to do
whether
so.
to move forward.
They have bought the lights that they put up on the test street. So
Right.
there's 18 lights that were purchased and installed on the 3 test streets, but the purchase hasn't been made, and that's one of the issues that we've heard from them, that they have a December deadline to
For
spend the
purchasing,
money.
Right,
Yeah.
and so that's one of the reasons
I was
yeah,
incorrect.
and that's one of the reasons we have Mr. Doherty here tonight. We have the work session next week on the 17th, and on Monday evening we're doing the tour. So there is a bit of urgency to come to a decision on this, but we want to make sure we're doing it thoughtfully and getting community input. Any other public comments this evening? Seeing none, we will move to council comments. Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. Continuing on the same subject of the streetlights, I first wanted to say that I'm impressed with all the work that we've put into this and with how complicated the whole subject is. But I've mentioned before, and I remain concerned, that we are not putting equal focus on getting expert advice on the safety aspect of the lighting that we have with the environmental aspects. The whole reason for having streetlights to begin with is public safety. And I'm not suggesting that environmentalists aren't giving us accurate safety information on proper lighting levels, but I think that it's important to have public safety people involved in the conversation, because I don't think the environmentalists would feel comfortable with the public safety people being the only ones talked to and making decisions about the environmental viability of streetlights. And one of the things that I want to make sure is covered is there are many aspects to safety. It's not just having safety for cars driving down the road, but I know especially in my ward, we're interested in the pedestrian safety as they walk through the streets, not just for possible crimes, but also be able to see the bumps and cracks that might be in the sidewalks. Even though we have a great city and a good public works department, there are occasionally obstacles on the sidewalks that have to be addressed. And then another piece of it is the perception of safety. And that is important to people when they think about how safe is my neighborhood. There has to be the perceived safety. Again, I'm not saying that the street lights that we're testing aren't going to provide that, but I think it's something that we're not hearing from the experts in that, with that specialty of public safety. The shielding, all these things are important, but I think the safety is equally important, and we should have experts involved. We don't have any highways through Tacoma Park, but we need proper lighting levels for the residential streets and for the pedestrians. That was the one topic I want to mention, and I'm quickly going to my notes here. I'm sorry to hold you up.
As you're holding us up, I was just going to say that our chief has sent us 2 emails with some studies done on safety and lighting, and we can see if maybe he could
He's continuing to compile information. We'll be sharing that as part of your discussions that are upcoming.
Right, and we can maybe see if he can attend, or someone from the police department can attend the work session on the 17th.
I certainly appreciate that, and I'm not sure what his level of expertise is in lighting, so.
No, I understand that. That's part of what we've been looking at.
Appreciate that. But I did want to thank city manager and deputy city manager for the easement map that you provided for Hilltop Avenue, and also for the traffic enforcement information. That was very helpful. That's it for now. I'm just, again, curious on working with my colleagues who are talking about the tree ordinance and what changes we might like to see in that, because that's an issue throughout the city. Thank you.
Yeah. Councilmember Siemens. Smith, sorry, it's an S.
He could go again.
I know.
We look alike.
There's 4 S's up there.
They're right here.
First, I'd like to associate myself with my colleague, Councilmember Siemens' comments about public safety. The demographics in wards 4 and 5 are very similar, and there are just some parts of the ward that really do need a lot of lighting. So I think that is really important that we do talk about public safety and lighting for Ward 5. I would like to thank the city manager for a recent hire. Grace Wiggins in the Housing Department. She met with the leadership of Essex House Tenant Association with Gene Kerr last week. It was probably the best meeting I've ever had with HCD staff regarding the Tenant Association issues that have been ongoing in this apartment. She had some excellent ideas. I just want to thank you. That is fantastic hire. I want to remind my colleagues, starting next week, MML's fall conference. So please, if you have the opportunity, at least attend one day. It's only in Annapolis, so you don't have to drive far. And on the 10th, I'm going to give there's going to be a little round table with a number of chairs of different committees and President-elect Ryan Spiegel to talk about some of the upcoming things that are going to be going on next year. And since I'm chairing the CPC committee, I'll give a little blurb. So if you guys want to drop by and say hi, that'd be fantastic. And finally, I want to take a moment to thank Darrell Braithwaite and Public Works for the work that they did on Winding Hill Way. I really appreciate it. This was all part of the prescriptive easement deal that the city worked on with one of the landlords, and making these improvements to the street, I think residents really appreciate. So thank you.
Councilmember Kovar?
Thank you, Mayor. Two things. One, Mr. Loveless mentioned the upcoming rally. I recently learned of another one that's taking place tomorrow, and so I'm just going to mention it in case people are interested. Excuse me. This is sponsored by NOW and other organizations. The National Organization for Women is tomorrow, Thursday, October 4th. Meet at 12:30 p.m. And basically, this is folks gathering at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, where a certain nominee currently works, as 333 Constitution Avenue. And then the participants are walking to the Supreme Court. And just reading from this, to show through our numbers and our rallying cries that Mr. Kavanaugh should not be seated as a justice in the Supreme Court. So people are welcome to attend that if they're free tomorrow. Secondly, unrelated to that, folks who live in North Tacoma are certainly aware of all the street closures and utility work that's been taking place. And yesterday it kind of all came together. We had WSSC working on Philadelphia Avenue and PEPCO working on Tacoma and finishing up, and also working on Fenton. And I think Washington Gas was involved somewhere over on Eastern, and there was maybe a private thing happening on Boston, all of which led to closures of the streets or detours or temporary stop-and-go kind of flagging operations. And then there was, I don't know whether it was connected to any of those projects or not, but there was a water main break, and it was at Albany and Tacoma, and the water was rushing down Albany, and fortunately it appears it didn't get into anybody's house, although it was quite a heavy flow, and that ended up keeping those areas closed off, in some cases up till midnight. And I think about a third of the streets in Ward 1 were closed or partly closed during all this. And, you know, accidents like that will happen. I just think that there just isn't enough coordination and planning in place for when something like that occurs. And so I would highlight two things specifically. Our police did get over there to help out. I will say that the PEPCO people responded quickly, as they have on a lot of these things, but I think when there's that much happening all at the same time in a small neighborhood, if you wanted to get over to Silver Spring, you really couldn't without it taking way longer than usual. I was out in the area myself. I don't have a small kid to pick up or anything like that, so I could wait an extra 15 minutes. But for other people, that would really not just be a minor problem. And two things I would highlight are, one, when there is an incident of that type, an emergency, and once it's been responded to and contained, there ought to be some consideration to whether other activity happening nearby should maybe be suspended while that's happening. That's number one. The second one is we've had situations, and specifically with WSSC, where the original plan, and they presented to us on this, was that they would work in sections down Philadelphia Avenue of 150 to 200 feet on one side only, so the other lane would always be open. And once you got past that with the flaggers, you could be on your way. The other day, they had 3 or 4 sections like that. So really, continuing on Philadelphia was bad. And, you know, people say, well, it's only from 9:30 or so until 3, but yeah, starting at about 4 o'clock, that's when the regular Philadelphia Avenue traffic jamming heading up to Tacoma Junction happens. So I'd also like us to have a better plan in place if they're going to be deviating from the original plans. Now, in the case of Pepco, and I'm sorry to continue this a little bit longer to my colleagues, but in the case of Pepco, when they wanted to work on 3 additional Saturdays, they're not normally working on Saturdays. I thought that was reasonable since they'd lost some time because of the rain, but I wouldn't be inclined to extend that any further. So I don't know exactly what the answers are, but I'm going to be talking to the city attorney and to my colleagues, and also reaching out to county and state elected officials to find out what steps we can take to bring the way utilities and contractors operate in our city more under control, and hoping that my colleagues don't have similar kinds of things in the areas they represent, because it really did kind of bring everything to a halt, and I just don't think that's what we want to see. Yes, we need some of these improvements. We do need to have water mains that don't break, as we saw yesterday. We do need to have more modern electrical grids and so on, but I think we need to have a little more control and say so over exactly how that's done. So thank you.
Councilmember Costick.
Thank you. I just have a couple things. One is I want to remind people, I've mentioned it repeatedly, so I won't go into detail tonight, but the Council of Governments Transportation Planning Board is working on Visualize 2045, which is the long-range transportation plan for the region. It is open for public comment through October 7th, so you have about another week, a little less than a week left if you're interested in reviewing that document and submitting your comments online. You're also welcome to contact me directly, and I'm happy to hear from people and share some of those thoughts with the board when we vote later this month on the plan. I also want to assure Councilmember Siemens and others that we are working hard on the tree ordinance. Councilmember Kovar, Councilmember Dabala, and I have been meeting and talking with staff and are hoping to have some information to share soon about next steps. We definitely want to make this something that involves a lot of input from the residents and working with committees and making sure that we hear a lot of different viewpoints on this. So I hope we'll be able to make some progress soon on that. And then finally, there are a bunch of events coming up. I just wanted to run through them briefly. The Street Festival is this Sunday. Walk to School Day is next Wednesday, October 10th. And then the Youth Council, since we don't have a meeting next week, the Youth Council is organizing a Youth Town Hall event that will be the following Sunday, October 14th. So if there are young people out there, I encourage you to take part in that. Thank you.
Councilwoman Searcy.
I just want to, good evening, everyone. Mind my manners. Councilmember Kovar, I'm there with you in terms of road work that is happening. The night work that is happening on New Hampshire Avenue is definitely keeping residents up at night. So everyone's trying to just buy earplugs and just wait it out. But you know, if we receive a request for another extension, we should definitely try to push back on that. I want to thank everyone for coming out to Night Market. It was so much fun. The bands were amazing. The food was wonderful. We had a really, really great time. Special thanks to the CDA, or Crossroads Development Authority. Kayla Ganal did a fantastic job organizing things, as well as the Crossroads Farmers Market folks that came out. So thank you all. It was a wonderful event. I also want to thank New Hampshire Gardens Community Association that held their neighborhood meeting last night and had an opportunity to sit down and talk to residents about questions and things that were raised. So thank you all for inviting me out, and definitely will continue to follow up on with staff regarding issues that were discussed. And lastly, the next lunch with the mayor is next Friday. So we will be at, I just want to make sure I have this right, Tijuana's, I believe.
Yeah. Tijuana's, yeah.
Tijuana's.
On
yes.
the 12th.
On the 12th at noon. It's 949 University Boulevard. So please, 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 everyone feel welcome to come out and have lunch with the mayor as well as myself, and just kind of eat some great food.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And then the next lunch with the mayor is going to be on the 26th at Tiffin's, just to mark your calendars.
Mark your calendars.
So. Councilmember Kovar may join us. Councilwoman DeBala.
Yes, hi. I'm still here, and if Charlotte's still in the room, I did see you on TV, and saw what you were talking about. I wanted to ask a question. I might have missed it when I was trying to hook up online by phone, but the Monday tour of the LED lighting is still on, yeah?
Absolutely.
7:30 Hickory.
No, we're going
Community
to...
center. We're leaving from the community center.
Yeah, the city manager, when she does her comments, will provide an update on the logistics for Monday night.
Sorry, never mind. And Councilmember Costick beat me to the punch on trees. But yes, sometime real soon we have gotten something around to all the different council members, and we'll get another version of that around soon. That's just an approach for how we're going to handle this very timely and lively topic. I did want to call to everyone's attention the request for taking some action on Ethan Allen townhomes. I'm not there, so I can't look at it. I understand the police went out. The city manager's aware, but I wasn't completely clear if Public Works and Housing and Community Development were aware of this also. I'm sure you all will pick it up on the tomorrow morning and track down whatever needs to be done. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Well, going last, everybody has made all the announcements. So I'll just say I had a great time at the night market. It was wonderful. I did think I ate from every vendor, so that was my goal. And I just want to echo what Councilmember Kovar said. The issue of coordination between the utilities, SHA, and WSSC is something I've been working on for probably 3 or 4 years. For the last few years, we've put into Maryland Municipal League a legislative action item that I wrote when I was actually in City and Councilwoman Costick's seat as a city council person. We were lucky that Councilmember Smith was chairing a working group on this, but I do think we need to push forward and actually have something at the state level, because we are dealing with State Highway that is responsible at the state level, WSSC, which is a regional organization, and the utilities. So I'd love to work with you more on that issue. Councilmember Smith, would you like to?
And I'll just say, since I have intimate knowledge of this, many members of the league want to do something, and we all have the same issue. But the problem is that the utilities have their own lobbying shops inside the organization, and if need be, that they do bring on outside people to help them. And it's hard to get a member of the General Assembly that is willing to stand up when the pressure is on, when the league says we want to push this bill. We have tried in the past, I'm not going to name names, with members to draft legislation, to be ready to drop that legislation, but when the pressure is put on them, the bill disappears.
Yeah, and I think that there's a number of steps that we can take besides just legislate, but I agree that that's an important point.
And another thing that, when I was president of the Montgomery County chapter, tried to put together an MOU with one of the utilities to try to, work out some of these things, because WSSC represents Montgomery County and Prince George's County. That was something that they found interesting, but they did not actually provide a draft document that we could, write up or, work on or even consider as a chapter. So, I mean, these things have been before, the local chapter, the league as a whole, but they just have not materialized because the utilities, this is what they do every day in their government relations shops, try to stop us from taking away some of their, as they feel, rights. So, I mean, I as chair of CPC, I did ask the chair of the subcommittee for workshops to have another utility roundtable. That will be presented to the group. So that should happen. But it is an ongoing process to try to rein in the utilities, and it's all of them.
City Manager?
Thank you. A follow-up, a little bit out of order from my city manager comments that are written and will be posted online. For the LED bus tour on Monday, October 8th at 7:30 p.m., we'll have buses leaving at 7:35 from the community center and going over to Erie Avenue. People who want to meet us there can go to the intersection of Erie and Flower. Will be in that area from between 7:45 to 8:05 p.m. Then we're going to go over to Hickory and Elm area from 8:15 to 8:45 p.m. We'll be looking at the lights in that area. This information will be posted, as I said, in several places, as well as included in my city manager report, so you can send it out. We encourage people to come along or stop in at these sites that are in their neighborhood, and we will have representatives from PEPCO as well on this tour, so we will have an opportunity to really hear some information from them and ask questions. I think it'll be very helpful to do that. So Monday at 7:30. Switching to going back to the, I had a great time at the night market, by the way. The food, whatever it was I was eating, was really good, and that was nice. And I saw some of the council members dancing, and so it was very good. The Crossroads Community Food Network has received a grant for $250,000 for a period of 3 years from the USDA Farmers Market Promotion Program. That's just wonderful. And certainly we've partnered and supported them for many years, but they have a project called Building a Sustainable Farmers Market, Planning for Long-Term Food Access for Low-Income Crossroads Community Members. And so we're really excited to share that information and congratulate them for winning that. For those of you who think about protecting from pesticides our community, we have the 2018 Safe Grow Photo Contest underway. Voting is open through October 19th for the top favorites from the 30 submissions we received. So it's a fun thing to do, and we hope you go online and vote. Gina Mathias mentioned the Energy Action Month bulb exchange, so we hope people take advantage of that. And then just to mention that we have the Lights On After School event that we celebrated last year. The Recreation Department will be participating in this year's National Lights On After School program. The program highlights all the great things area organizations do throughout the year for after-school program participants. And those students who are in the Community Center's Afternoon Edition program will participate in a cooking program and some art programs. And the After the Bell program at the Rec Center on New Hampshire Avenue will have a sports project and arts project. So we like participating in it. It's a great way to share that we do care about kids after school. I think that's it.
Great. Thank you. Any questions for the city manager? All right. All right, next we have our 2 work sessions. The first is our Commemoration Commission Recognition Program and other projects. And yes, please, we don't feel badly if you leave. We thank you very much for staying so long. So Mr. O'Connor and other member, I don't know who all of the commission would like to come up. I'll just say that we did hold last Monday night, was that September something, 24th? We held a joint meeting with the Commemoration Commission and the City Council. I'll just review quickly so people know what we discussed was looking at the recommendation on streets named for Civil War generals, and the commission briefed the council on recognition programs developed by the commission and other projects. What was decided at the meeting was that there would be a commemorative marker or plaque to provide historical information on the generals for which streets are named. So that was the 5 streets you all looked at. The council requested that the commission come back to the council with a process for developing the language, design, and placement of the marker, and you have some feedback this evening regarding that, and to reach out to as many parts of the community as possible. I know we also specifically at the meeting talked about young people, and I see Elliot has left, who's our representative on our youth council, but I know Councilwoman Kostick has already connected one young person with the commission on that. In addition, the other thing that the second thing we talked about was to place an interpretive marker at Hefner Park to recognize that recreation space was taken from the African American community on Ritchie Avenue in order to build the public works facility. The council endorsed this idea and the holding of, and the agenda item says a public meeting, but I think our conversation was envisioning more public engagement than just one meeting. So I wanted to suggest that at Hefner Park with the commission and the neighborhood to hear what residents' wishes are for the interpretive marker. The third thing that we discussed and decided upon was establishing a process for the renaming of Jackson Boyd Park. The commission will return, as you are tonight, with more information and a discussion on the citywide recognition process that would be used to select the new name. And the fourth item was to provide funding for the commission in support of the work to be done. The commission was asked by the council to develop a budget, including funding for outreach efforts. The commission also presented information on its inventory of existing commemoratives and on a series of recognition program that has been developed, particularly the individual recognition program. The council endorsed the personal recognition program and concept. Additional information on the citywide recognition program will be provided this evening. So I think if you're good with all that I just said in terms of a wrap-up from our meeting on September 24th, I think our agenda tonight is to dig deeper into the citywide recognition process.
I think we are in agreement that that was a good summary. For the record, Richard O'Connor, 7110 Maple Avenue.
Jessica Kessler, 7214 Central Avenue.
How do you wish to proceed? We had presented orally the citywide recognition program, and we had some discussion with regards to that, and I think we are open for further discussion.
Great, and just so my colleagues here on the City Council and for folks following along in the audience and at home, this is attached to the agenda item. So I think maybe we could just review and then people could provide feedback on this. So the citywide recreation program, an individual business or civic organization is eligible for a citywide recognition based on the following criteria. And stop me if you've made any changes to this since our conversation. What the commission is putting forward as criteria is made a contribution to the social, cultural, historical, political, economic, environmental, or civic life of the city. That was one. And I know we had this conversation, these are all ands. The second criteria is if an individual has lived or worked within the city of Tacoma Park for at least 25 years, or if a business civic organization has operated within the city of Tacoma Park for at least 15 years, and be nominated, third item is be nominated by 75 residents of the city, 16 years old or older, on a form created by the commission, nominated individuals can be alive or deceased. So those were the three criteria the commission was putting forward. And I wanted to just pause there for a moment. Does anyone have any comments, recommendations, or suggestions for changes regarding the criteria for the citywide recognition program? No? I think the only thing I would put forward, given conversations that we've been having regarding petitions and other things, is if the commission would actually consider another option and not just the nominated by 75 residents of the city. If there was something, another way that a group or individual came forward to nominate someone and they met the other criteria, and just contemplate whether or not they needed to collect the 75 names in addition to that. As we've seen in the past through doing some of the work that we're doing on racial equity, we know that sometimes some of the barriers to some communities is these types of petition processes, and so in causing barriers to engagement. So would like the commission to consider that.
I think our discussions among commission members were that as a citywide recognition, this was a higher level of responsibility, and we needed to at least have individuals indicate that this was broadly recommended by the citizens. So in other words, just one nomination, one individual making a nomination, really doesn't represent the community. Mm-hmm. And so we felt that there had to be some threshold, but I think further discussions that we've had since our work session, we're certainly open to come up with other alternatives so we can come back to the council in which people could make a nomination. But we think that there's got to be some threshold that signifies that this is a significant citywide recognition, not just a local recognition for an individual, and that this individual or organization was in fact a significant contributor to the various issues contributing that we've identified. So.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Costick?
I just had a question about how the process would work. So is this envisioned as something where 75 residents you'd have 75 signatures, and people would approach the commission and ask that they've identified a place and they want to name that after someone? Or is the commission going to identify specific areas that might be ideal for naming and then put a call out to the community for those potential names? Because I could see that kind of going towards the mayor's point, where in an opportunity like that, where you're identifying places, maybe it would offer more opportunities to suggest people who might be beyond what you might get if you're just asking residents who are more engaged in the government or more engaged with the city already to put forth a name.
We had expected people to approach us with people that they would like to see memorialized or commemorated, as opposed to us presenting things that people could name. I mean, if you have ideas for making this process more equitable, I certainly, we would, of course, invite those. It shouldn't be a process that is very easy to do. Mm-hmm. I mean, we want it to be equitable, but like maybe if we have a council member's support in lieu of the 75 signatures or something like that it has somebody's rubber stamp. Maybe, I mean, I was just trying to problem solve it. Mm-hmm. If anybody else has any ideas.
I see someone looming behind you.
Maybe making it 25 signatures perhaps might be more feasible. But we did want it to be someone who was significant that was getting that degree of memorialization, and we don't want it for everybody. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Bruce Williams, member of the commission. I want to remind you that we had originally proposed 3 levels of recognition, with the eliminated one in the middle being neighborhood recognition, which had a significantly lower threshold. And so with the elimination of that, you've kind of got individual and citywide. which causes that gap that you're trying to address.
So if I can just follow up with one question. So for example, renaming Jackson Boyd Park, which we discussed, that seems to me a case where you've identified a place that we need to or want to rename. Is that something that would follow this process typically if this process were already established, or is that something where you would identify some names, or how would that work?
I think with regards to Jackson Boyd, we've identified that that's an issue that needs to be addressed, and there's significant interest in changing that name. And so the commission has proposed to begin the process on its own. So I think we would have a combination of commission proposals versus petitions from individuals or council members or state officials who wish to have either name changes or wish to have recognitions for certain buildings, or I mean, we have a list of types of recognitions that we put in this proposal, and so I think the process could be an open process that is not just restricted to just petitioning. It can come from a variety of different sources.
Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar?
Yeah, the one other thing I'd like to suggest, and this builds off of what the mayor was just talking about, you know, in the Baseball Hall of Fame, and there's a point to this, you have to get 80% of the baseball writers to approve you, but then they have two separate processes with the old timers where the process is different, and with the so-called Negro Leagues, and in both of those, it's not the same kind of level. And so they not only have, taking into account the time that's passed or the discrimination that exists, they not only have a somewhat different process for getting people in, but there's also an effort to kind of look for people. And so I guess I would say, and I don't know whether that should be the Commemoration Commission, but, and this, as I say, relates to what the mayor said, I'm fine with the petition being one of the ways to get on there, but there may need to be some mechanism by which the commission or others would try to find or uncover or look back on our history and see people who are deserving but who modern day people might not necessarily know of, so that we don't just have kind of a popularity contest for certain existing people, even though I'm looking at some who could potentially be celebrated as well. So that's another thing I put out there. I'm not sure exactly what the answer would be.
I think that's consistent with what we've been talking about.
And I think the purpose of establishing this is to eliminate the ad hoc process that the city has gone through since I've lived here for 33 years. Sometimes you just never know where those recognitions are going to come from, nor have there's been a methodology or a process for determining whether that individual or organization was worthy to receive that recognition. And that's what this is an attempt to do, is to try to develop a process that's fair and equitable, but also is a two-step process where it goes through the commission and then it goes to the council, and we have full public disclosure and transparency on the recognition process itself.
Okay. Councilwoman Searcy?
So I just want to echo the sentiments that have already been raised. First, thank you all so much, because I know that this is a challenging issue to tackle. But I do want to echo the idea of the commission or maybe making recommendations in terms of the quantity of locations that we could potentially name, locations, as well as pre-identifying a couple of historical names that we may want to consider as a council. I think, you know, it would be helpful to have something going on a regular basis where we're not just solely reliant on residents to identify locations and identify names and do the work of walking around and collecting names on a petition. So I do think that even if it's just an annual thing, hey, we have 5 spots, we're not saying that we need to name all of these 5 spots, but here are 5 potential locations, here's 5 potential names, regardless of how we receive them, justification for those names, and how much it would cost, right, to put a plaque up. I think that would be helpful. Another thing is the petition process itself. One thing that I mentioned was for many residents, and it's not just residents of color, but perhaps some younger residents and the like who do everything online. And the idea of having a nomination process where you have to actually physically go around and get someone to sign a piece of paper and put down their address just kind of seems a little antiquated. So if there are some ways in which we can better leverage technology to not only get the word out about accepting nominations, but also provide links for people to do like e-petitions or even vote on, let's say we don't get anyone that comes forward and says, hey, we should name a park after this person. But if you all have recommendations, and the question to the community is, we have these 5 people, here's a little bit about them, tell us what you think. It's a way to kind of do that electronically where people can kind of weigh in and vote. And that could help with some of the decision making around which person would elevate to the top of the list. But again, I thank you all for the work that you're doing, and I appreciate the opportunity to just learn more about all of the hard work that you've done in terms of trying to streamline this process that didn't exist prior to you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Great. Councilwoman DeBala, are you still with us? No, I think she left. All right. Yep.
I am.
Okay.
I don't have anything to add, though.
Okay. Terrific. And I think just because I'll just say it again, I'm just remembering that Ms. Cohen and I had the opportunity to have coffee together on Friday, and one of the things that we talked about is the rich history of our community. We talked about this last week about Hefner Park, but even just thinking about the history of the apartment buildings here on Maple Avenue and other areas of our community. The danger of coming and talking to the council is that we always like to give more work to committees. And I think one of the things that I would say, and what I'm hearing from my colleagues here, is that we'd like you to think about not just people coming to you and wanting to name things, but is there a more active role for this commission and thinking about really the history of our community and identifying, as we've said, some areas where we may want to look at renaming, reflecting that history and individuals who have been in our community. So I think Jackson Boyd Park is a great example. I think there are other parks that just have names that we could think about, Spring Park or Forest Park. We did have a proclamation today for Indigenous Peoples Day that will be on Monday. So there is a rich history of Indigenous people in this area. There's a lot of things we could think about how we connect the naming of different locations and dedications to understanding our history here. So I'll just put that out as well. But I think overall, we are in agreement in the commission moving forward with the work you are doing. We are very, very appreciative of all that work, and look forward to continuing conversations and to be a resource when you need us. Is there anything else you need from us at this point?
Yes, actually.
Yes.
One thing we definitely need the council's help with is finding more commissioners for our little committee, because we are chartered to have at least 5 members, and we're down to 3 voting members, of which
you're it.
We are it. And so we were wondering if the most success that, from my understanding, that commissions have is by asking the city council for suggestions, and those people naming potential commission members. So if it would be great to get some ideas from you of people that we could, being that it looks like we have expanding duties to have more active members. So if you have anything you would like to suggest, that would be great.
Great, wonderful. And I know Councilwoman Costick is already on
I was
it.
just going to say, yes, I just heard from a resident in Ward 3 who is a teenager and who is really interested in joining the committee and hopefully will put in his application in the next couple of days.
Cool.
Great.
That's wonderful.
Good.
And I'll just add another item. In looking at the resolution that created the commission that had cause to look at as we had our discussions with the council last week, I noticed some language in there that I hadn't remembered was in there that said no more than 2 consecutive terms for members of the commission. And so I know they're staggered, but that's going to start to become an issue sooner rather than later, and it might be something you want to consider addressing.
Okay, we will. And actually, on our to-do list for Councilwoman Costick and I, that we got a little off track on, is to be reviewing actually all the charters of the citywide committees to actually help put in more standardized on terms and other things, because right now it's every committee is a little bit different, and it's hard, I think, for committee members, for city staff, and us as council members to keep track of all these things. So we have on our to-do list to bring that back to council, and we'll consider that. So,
Because you don't want to be surprised when all of a sudden the people that have been busy on the commission go away.
I know, we don't. We can. I think we can change that.
And we're all getting older, that's the problem.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Our last item tonight is a review of our housing component of our draft Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan. Tonight's discussion is basically kind of a reboot for us to remind us of where we were back in the spring when we were presented with the presentation when the consultants came in order for us to really dig in on this on our next work session and meeting we have on Monday night. Would the city manager like to?
Well, I just want to know, I've made sure that you have copies of the presentation that Estates will be given, which is just as you said, it's kind of an overview. But I want you to look at the top of this first slide and realize that this draft plan came to you on October 2017. Oh, wow. So it's been a year. The data's a year old. A lot has happened in a year. So, but we do want to move forward expeditiously, identifying the important steps that the council needs to take. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Daines, but and we'll have a lot to talk about on the other 2 nights that we've got this scheduled for. Tonight's an opportunity, even though it's a little late, to start thinking about this again and focusing questions and getting those kind of questions ready for our next meeting, but also if you want to send us those comments in advance so we know how to prepare for the future discussions, we appreciate it. Thanks.
Good evening. Can I move this? This is a new software. Trying. Okay. Oh. There. Okay. Good evening. As the city manager and the mayor have indicated, tonight is just a sort of an effort to jog your memory in terms of where we're at with the draft housing and economic development strategic plan, and the focus is going to be on the housing elements contained within that draft. Just as a reminder, there are a number of goals that are associated with housing, and I've noted several of them here. The overarching goal is to advance the city council's priority to create a quality living environment for the community as a whole. In the development of the draft plan, there were a number of factors that were identified that impact housing in Tacoma Park. They include, but are not limited to, the increasing cost of home ownership, the fact that median rental housing costs are lower than in Tacoma Park than they are in the surrounding area, and that's due in large part to the rent stabilization law. And then also recognizes that there's an increasing demand for housing in the region due to just growth that is occurring overall. These challenges impact both renters as well as homeowners and residents, regardless of their housing situation, and provided a framework when the strategic plan was being developed and conversations were had with the stakeholders and the residents that participated in its development. And in large part, they drive the recommendations that are included within the strategic plan. Before I go further, I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up in terms of how I've structured this. As the city manager has indicated again, that this is intended to jog your memory. It's just a snapshot of the recommendations that are included in the draft plan and are primarily focused on the housing aspects of it. There's more specific information in the actual draft strategic plan and included in the Mullen and Lonergan's presentation that was given back in February of this year, I believe. What I've attempted to do is, if you tried to track them together, my presentation doesn't match the Mulligan and Lonergan presentation. What I've tried to do is group them so that you can get a feel for who's being impacted by the recommendations and aspects of the actual implementation of the recommendations if the council decides to go forward with them. So essentially, you're going to see a series of slides, and what I have here is sort of how to read them, I guess. The program name is self-evident. I sort of cataloged the different recommendations by the general action that would be required, and then did a summary of the specific recommendations that were included within the strategic plan and that were highlighted by Mullen and Lonergan when they were here. I've included as additional bullet points staff recommendations, because some of the recommendations are very narrow and very specific, but based on our experience, not only during the development of the strategic plan, but also in the interim, there are additional things that we would like to see take place. At the bottom is sort of a code, secret code, if you will, that identifies the group who's primarily affected by the recommendation, and that could include renters, homeowners, or residents as a whole. The implementation period that we're anticipating it taking, short, which would be 1 to 2 years, medium 2 to 5 years, and long-term 5 or more years. There are also a couple of recommendations that are ongoing. Estimated costs are just that. They will change as we go forward in finalizing the recommendations. So they're very rough, and as I indicated, they may change. And then the degree of impact is not only on the impact of the recommendation once it's implemented on the community as a whole, but so it could be the numbers of people that are impacted by it, but also the impact on individuals. So there's some programs that there will be very few people affected by it, but the impact will be great for those few people. So here's our first one. There's a recommendation within the plan regarding the emergency assistance program. It's primarily program modifications, and they are recommending that it be expanded to include immigrants and refugees. I believe this was at the recommendation of one of the members of the public tonight, to not only expand it to include immigrants and refugees, but also increase outreach in areas within the community they may congregate. Staff is also proposing that we do greater data analysis of the impact of the program and increase opportunities to provide residents with an opportunity to make donations to the program, and then review the program perimeters to see if it's actually addressing the needs of the community. This would impact residents as a whole. It's a fairly short-term process. It could be low to moderate as far as cost, depending upon the funding that's required, and would have a high impact on the community members that are impacted by it. The recommendations also include some education and outreach. It primarily focuses on the tenants' rights course that we provide right now. Thank you so much, Susie. I don't know what it is. I've either had too much coffee or not enough coffee. So the recommendations focus on the tenant rights courses that we provide. We're looking at the possibility of expanding it to on a number of ways. One is to expand the scope of our current Ask Moses series. If you've been watching that at all, you'll see that we're taking it from not only just landlord-tenant, but also moving into homeownership, and there'll be some on the election coming up in October, as well as the Emergency Assistance Program. Working with staff to increase the use of social media and newsletter resources. We're in the process of developing an online certification course for landlords so that people can take it in drips and drabs rather than coming and spending a lot of time with us here in the auditorium. And then doing additional outreach to landlords and increasing opportunities to engage with tenants on site where they live. Again, this will have a primarily impact on both residents as a whole and renters. It's an ongoing thing, and then the rest of it is fairly self-evident. Included in the recommendations is the continuation of our current landlord-tenant mediation services. It's a very effective program. We're also looking at expanding it by working to proactively create new tenant associations and expand the capacity of existing tenant associations. And we discussed that when the FY19 budget was being developed in terms of revisiting our tenant our tenant capacity program and bringing more of that in-house. This one is fairly current. There are recommendations regarding the pilot program. They expressed concern that there wasn't a database to track and analyze the program. And while I disagree with the recommendation, or acknowledge we were doing that, and we are doing that, we're going to be expanding that. And we would also advocate that this recommendation be expanded to include the development of a policy that could be applied across the board as requests come in. Also impacting the rental housing community is some recommendations that were made regarding the ordinance governing rent stabilization in the community. Their primary focus was on limiting occupancy of stabilized units to individuals of lower incomes, which would then theoretically result in a mixed income property. We would like to expand on that and place less emphasis on that, but also look at a number of other elements that have been discussed over the last couple of years, ranging from informing residents of the impact of impending rent stabilization exemptions, making modifications to the code that would encourage energy efficiency improvements, and then also to streamline the rent increase or fair return rent increase process that would allow people to encourage people to make additional improvements to their rental properties. For the rental inspection program, the emphasis is on being more aggressive in the enforcement of the property code to the point of increasing maintenance standards for specific properties and increasing the fee and frequency of inspections. There are some challenges with some of these recommendations that they are worth pursuing. We've also internally would be encouraging the recommendation to be expanded to include the creation of incentives for high-performing properties and then the development of a watch list for problematic properties. A new program that's proposed, which internally has met with some mixed feelings, is the development of a property management company that would be nonprofit based to address some of the concerns that some of the stakeholders that participated in the conversations regarding the development of the draft shared with the people that were preparing the study, and also to provide some seed money for its establishment. The down payment assistance program, which is where we're starting to get into the homeowners, the recommendations are made to modify that program, including partnering with local lenders and local realtors to market and increase funding for the program, and then also to require a home ownership course and credit counseling. staff was also proposing that we restructure the program to reflect our local housing market and to increase the amount of down payment assistance that's available. A new program that's proposed and is incorporated within the recommendations is to secure funding for a housing rehab program. And we are proposing that that be expanded to include additional funding options rather than just the home program, and to explore opportunities to partner with nonprofits in terms of doing the work and administering the fund. Vacant properties were also identified as being problematic within the community, and a recommendation was made that, like what you're doing with or considering with the commercial properties in the community, but to increase the property tax rate for vacant properties. The intent being to encourage them to be sold and become more active. We would also propose that the city implement the increased inspection fee for the vacant properties that it monitors, and then also felt that this might be an opportunity for ongoing capitalization of the Housing Reserve Fund. For the tenant opportunity to purchase program, which you addressed within the last month, the consultant was recommending that we waive the option on properties that are purchased with public funds. This would be for like nonprofits like Montgomery Housing Partnership, which is accessing low and moderate income housing tax credits or funding through the county. We would propose that that also be expanded to waive that option when it's transferring from one LLC to another LLC, but the actual ownership is the same. Right now, if Montgomery Housing Partnership needed to refinance and for a variety of reasons had to switch it to a new LLC, they would still have to offer it up to the tenants, even though they weren't actually selling it. We'd also look at the possibility of being more aggressive in exploring the city's option to purchase properties, particularly single-family residences, for possible incorporation within the Housing Land Trust. And then the ADUs, which has been very topical of late in terms of working with Montgomery County as it reviews its zoning requirements for that program. And then also staff would suggest that additional recommendation include identifying funding opportunities to offset renovation costs. The Housing Reserve Fund is a priority of the city councils, and there aren't a lot of specific recommendations within the strategic plan right now as far as what to do with the money. It focuses primarily on the capitalization of the fund. So we would advocate for identifying specific programs or projects that are priorities for the council, and that would be something we anticipate happening in the next month. Again, the development of the community land trust I referenced earlier. One of the things that we're looking at internally is the possibility of using small scattered sites. Typically people think of a large development site. There aren't a lot in Tacoma Park, but through the tenant opportunity to purchase property or ordinance, there may be a way of acquiring sites throughout the community. We would have to investigate the feasibility of doing that. And then last in the housing mix is encouraging and advocating for mixed-use development on some of the larger sites that are available in the community, primarily the Washington Adventist Hospital campus, the possible redevelopment of the recreation center, and then again identifying funding incentives that might be appropriate to encourage those sites to be redeveloped to provide additional housing. And then as both the mayor and the city manager have indicated, this is just the beginning of the next phase of this project. We're hoping that the council will identify its priorities, allowing us to refine the recommendations and present them to you along with the proposed implementation plan, where you could get to a point where we could advance the housing component of the strategic plan. That's it.
Great, thank you very much.
So we'll just do that next week. You know,
yeah.
it was actually, useful, I think, to kind of spark our memories a little bit about the different recommendations that were made. But I think we also need to be clear that there may be other thoughts that you also have that weren't in those draft recommendations that you might want to bring to the table, given the conversations that have been had even over the past year. It's important to recognize that this is part of the economic development strategic plan. It's both, and we recognize that we can't have a successful economic base if we don't have livable housing for different levels of people, and that a lot of our strategies to do economic development have to do with housing. So it's important for us to look at it. It's helpful to look at it as housing, but not forget there's those larger pieces. The other thing just that I have been given a lot of thought to lately has also been other kinds of goals that I might have that I'd love to share, that you may have similar kinds of goals. And, are we looking at maintaining the kind of mix of housing that we have currently, which has apartments and it has single-family homes, but not much in between? And what is the breakdown kind of affordability that we might want to have? What kind of, I'm curious about if there's a desirable percentage of housing units of whichever kind for lower income, for middle income, for upper middle income, for high income. Is there a mix that we want? Is there a way to identify that? So part of this is kind of thinking long term about, it may not be something that we can get to right away, but what is our long-term goal and vision about the housing supply of the city and who's in it? So a lot to think about. Happy to hear some comments tonight, but it may be more appropriate really to be kind of making notes and coming back for the next discussion.
Great, thank you.
The other thing that I'd like to point out, to expand a little bit on the city manager's comments, is that there have been a number of other sort of smaller studies, if you will, that are very focused, that have been completed by the Montgomery County Planning Department in the last year. One focuses on housing for seniors, and one of the observations that was made during the data analysis in the development of this plan was that our population is aging at a greater rate than the outlying or surrounding areas, that there are certain gaps, if you will, within the demographic cohort groups that we are not growing at the same rate as surrounding areas, even though it may seem like we're surrounded by children. We aren't compared to other places. And that many of the recommendations included within this plan provide that sort of continuum of housing, if you will, in terms of starting out as a renter and moving gradually into home ownership. That may not be a good fit for everyone, and it may not be based on stuff I've been reading lately. The home ownership dream of our parents and of ourselves may not be of the generation coming forward. So there are a variety of factors to take into consideration. The other thing also, and this expands a little bit upon what Mr. Sherwood was saying, is that this will not happen overnight. It will take time, and it will take resources, not only staff, but finances. And those are all things that would be incorporated within this process.
Great, thank you. A couple of just thoughts as we move forward. As the city manager said, I think thinking about our overall goals and like long-term, like where do we want to go? If there are some staff recommendations on what we should be using as benchmarks, and thinking about, do we think in terms of how many affordable, how many rental units do we want to have in rent stabilization? How many do we have that are, have been out of rent stabilized housing now? Do we want to look at, goals on affordability? What are some markers that we want to consider as our goals as we move forward in this process? Because I do think the recommendations and the overall report that we did receive was very helpful and really like giving us a picture of where we are, but helping us think about how we do a good job of really planning for the future. I'd like to maybe have us take a step back and think about how we think about that. The other thing as we move forward in this conversation, I think there's about 14, 16 different items, recommendations we put up here. I feel like some of them, and tell me if I'm wrong here, you're doing pretty well. You're making adjustments to. Sounds like you want to continue those things. I would say unless there's a reason to have that come back before council, that we continue doing those things and maybe keep them in the mix. But it's hard for me to wrap my head around in the same conversation, and I want to think about how we talk about the emergency assistance program and the community land trust. To me, they're just two very distinct things. If we're
doing, landlord training is just not in the same category as starting a huge thing,
Yeah, so as we move forward, just thinking about
I agree, the scale is different, but one leads into the other.
Yeah.
If you're looking at how one transitions from one stage to another.
Right. But there may be different, decision points that we're going to make on things on that. I really appreciate even though this was presented to us a year ago, I appreciate the addition at the bottom of looking at who's impacted, how long it will take, the money, the resources involved, and all of that. I think that's helpful as we move forward in thinking about these different options and how to dig into them. I'm going to turn it over to Councilwoman Searcy now.
Thank you. Thank you so much for refreshing our memories. One thing that I do want to echo is the point that was raised by the city manager in terms of how the economic development piece really does go hand in hand with the housing piece. Because many of our zoning opportunities to increase our housing stock are actually currently occupied by large commercial districts in the city that are zoned for mixed-use development. So it's kind of a bit of a chicken and egg issue, and you don't know which piece to deal with first, right? I also think that it's important for us to really just think strategically, not just about how we want to handle the housing recommendations that were put before us or the economic development piece, but what is the identity that the city of Tacoma Park wants to have. It's becoming really important for us to identify how we want to be viewed given the influx of development that is surrounding us, right? So you see what's happening in Hyattsville, and you see there's new development happening right down the road. The Purple Line is happening. Silver Spring is growing. How do we want to be a residential haven in the midst of all of this? And therefore, our priority would be to try to really increase housing, to create walkable communities, but not really focus as much on creating these really large commercial districts, right? Or is our plan to be some mix of the two? And so we really do want to focus on making sure that we have lots of commercial services that are available, and therefore we're willing to forgive some space for housing in order to increase density in terms of commercial services, right? So I think that those are some of the questions that's often quite challenging for councils, for anyone, to kind of think through in terms of the identity. And it kind of echoes some of the discussion or the pull back and forth around the rec center that happened with the prior council. You know, we need housing. It's in the plan, it's in the sector plan, housing, but we also need a rec center. And we also want mixed use. And how do we do all of those things together? So I do look forward to future discussions around not just the housing priorities, which are important, or economic development goals, which we may have, but how do we actually identify the vision for the city of Tacoma Park when the world around it is changing? Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar?
Thank you, and thanks for putting together that nice presentation with all the code at the bottom. I think it's really helpful. I had a few observations and then maybe one or two specific questions. You know, we'll be prioritizing, and I think Councilmember Searcy is right. We have to take into account these large issues. I think in terms of goals, which the mayor mentioned and which the city manager mentioned, I'd like to see us do some version of saying, for example, by X date, by X date, our goal is to have, for example, no net loss of affordable housing units, or ideally even by X date, an increase of X of in X of affordable housing. And that could be achieved in a number of different ways. But I think we need, to me, some sort of goals like that would fit in addition with some of the economic development questions that Councilmember Searcy was just talking about. And I think there's sort of three categories of how we could work on it. You know, there's a financial piece of it. So do we put money into our budget, or do we get grants and other kinds of assistance that we might apply for from other levels of government? There's who we collaborate with. So that's, you know, Prince George's County, Montgomery County, the districts, the state, whoever, maybe NGOs like Montgomery Housing Partnership and all the others, and maybe financial institutions like banks. But all three of those, I mean, that's, as we've talked about previously, I think the only way a small community like us can really do things at scale is to, you know, collaborate with other people. And then there's sort of three areas: preserving or keeping our rental stock good, preserving or keeping our home ownership good, which means keeping it affordable, and then whatever kinds of new construction we're going to have, whether it's at the rec center or Washington Adventist Hospital site or other kinds of places. So I sort of see all those buckets that we ought to be thinking about. Just a couple of specific questions I had. Would we even have the ability to do something like for each home that's sold in the city, and maybe this is just impossible under existing state law, to have some percentage amount, which could be really small, but which would add up over time, that purchasers would pay, that would go into the Affordable Housing Fund? Are we allowed to do something like that?
Many places do that, where they tie it to the transfer tax, or I'm not sure exactly what it's called. But because the city does not collect that, I don't believe
The
we
county
have the
does that.
ability to do that.
That's a state change we would, I think, need to get. But it's clearly something that, if we can't do it exactly that way, we would be interested in doing.
I mean, maybe we could work something out with the county where they would do it for us and give us the money back. But anyway, I think that would be one way to actually capitalize the, you know, the fund on an ongoing basis in a way that's directly connected to the sale of homes, which would be, you know, which would be
Real estate fees are typically a very common form of capitalizing affordable housing funds.
Now, you mentioned in the slide about the down payment assistance program that you want to revise it to reflect the local housing market. What does that mean?
It means the cap that we have on the purchase price of the home is lower than what houses are going for.
Okay.
And that the $10,000 down payment assistance, even if you marry it up with all the other resources that are out there, is still not enough to advocate for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing is that some of the programs that we've piggybacked on have caps about how much the property can cost, which is a little on the low side for us. We've been able to do it right now, but when our next round of assessments come out, it sounds like it'll be done. It'll be tough. So then maybe we need to change those criteria if there's a way to do that.
Is there any sort of, I mean, I don't really like the term, but moral hazard in terms of helping people buy, you know, these increasingly expensive homes? Or is that just what we have? So
well, the other tricky part is the higher the purchase price is, regardless of the down payment assistance, you still have to be able to make enough money to make the payments. Right. So one of the other options too that's been kicked around internally is increasing the income level of the people.
Right.
So it's over the area median income, which is also another political decision in terms of.
It seems like if the value of the house you could buy is going to go up, you might have to do some version of that too, right?
Well,
correct.
Yeah, I mean, that's why there's these other kind of creative things where, you know, as houses sell, you know, you don't necessarily, the person who sells the house doesn't necessarily get all of the profit from it. You know, you take a slice of that, and that helps offset the next house and the next house. you know, that goes into these different kinds of programs.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what I was talking about or implying with the scattered site
Right, with the
purchase
land
stuff.
trust for that.
Right now, the city council has an option to acquire any single-family rental house that is being rented. If it's being sold, you could buy that. You could then sell it, but not sell the land. So it would impact the purchase price. So there's some weird ways
So how
you
much
can go
money
about
would
doing
it take to make the land trust become a reality? I mean, that strikes me as a really interesting option, but an expensive one, right? To be able to do what you just described.
Land is not cheap around here either.
Yeah.
We need to investigate it.
Yeah. Just, I think, two other questions. So there's a connection of all this to the schools if we were to get to the point where we had substantial increases in housing at the rec center on New Hampshire Avenue over at Washington Adventist Hospital. So I don't know how we solve that problem, but you mentioned the children and so on, but we're already overcrowded in our schools and considering that. So I'm not sure what the answer to that is. And the other thing that I was just curious in what Wayne Sherwood suggested, and this isn't strictly affordable housing, I just wonder whether we would ever have the ability to do it, and I don't know what Councilmember Siemens or others would think about it, but the idea of having additional commercial activity on Maple Avenue beyond just the 3 little stores we have there. I mean, is there even some way that we could promote or encourage that? And that wasn't really part of tonight's.
I believe there's already an overlay.
Yeah, there's an overlay zone already.
To allow that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Councilman Kostick.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It's good to get back to this. I wrote down a lot of questions that I won't get into tonight, but I'll email some of those and we can have the further discussions. I do agree that this is something that will allow us to and also require us to look a little bit more at our identity as a community, as Councilmember Searcy pointed out, and our goals for the future and what we want to look like moving forward. I was curious, I know there was an effort to get resident feedback on the plan. Is that something that has been collected, and not tonight necessarily, but in the future, if you could share some key highlights from that, I think that would be helpful.
I believe it's all included on, if you go to the project page,
okay,
there is the SWOT analysis that incorporates that. And then there are appendices that have the responses through the surveys that we did. So because I thought somebody might ask, we had 45 people participate in stakeholder interviews, about 400 people do online resident surveys, about 200 people that participated to some level in the listening event that we did. And we also had 2 open houses, and then we had the forum that was here. So we had a good number of people that were involved in the process of developing this.
Great. And as we are moving forward and looking at this a little bit more, I really like the format here of having, at the bottom, having the different, the amount of money it will cost, the impact, those categories. I don't know that there necessarily needs to be another category listed there, but it would be helpful for me to get a sense of the potential level of staff workload that some of these things would involve. And I know that's difficult in some cases because it might involve a lot up front and then less later on, or it might vary between things. But that's something that I think would be useful to know, as well as if these things are things that could be done by staff in-house, or we would need to contract with an outside firm, as well as if there are any sort of priority levels, not based on things that we care about more necessarily, but based on timelines. If there are things that we have to do now or we'll miss our opportunity, or if there are things that we have to start now in order to be viable 5 or 10 years from now. I think it would be helpful to have that sense so that we could look at the timelines as we're doing these things and trying to prioritize.
Councilman DeBala, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. along those lines, I was wondering, maybe I'm the only one who's trying to do this to try to match what because I have the original strategic plan in front of me, try to match it with the slides that you just showed, which I find much more useful than the original report, but I'm having a little trouble mixing and matching. And I'm wondering, also, besides what what Councilmember Costick suggested, that we could maybe also get a sense of which is new versus ongoing. I think you mentioned it as you were going along, but I missed a couple of them. I thought this was really a great overview, and I'm wondering. I know that both staff and council members have ideas about other things to put on the table, as well as some things to take off. So I'd like to ask what the next step would be for that. Is that something we would all bring to the next work session? What are the staff recommendations for adding and taking off of this list that we've got from the consultant? I'm not clear what the next step is exactly.
So I would suggest, if it's okay with my colleagues, I appreciate this presentation. I think it was very helpful, but I think I don't want to focus on the list and these individual items. Okay. So as I think a couple of us said, I'd like to step back and think about the goals, the benchmarks we want to set, and that this is sort of the how am I looking at it? This is kind of like a toolbox, right? These are the options that we have to then reach some goals we want to be. I don't see any of these as these aren't our goals. These aren't the things we're working towards. Though I really want to do the community land trust, as you know. But I think that's not, that can't be like to do it just to do that. So I would say, I would like us, this was really helpful, and I'm glad we did this tonight. But for our future conversations, I don't want to just be going back to this list, adding or subtracting to it. I think we want to think about the goals, the benchmarks we want, and then kind of using this as the toolbox to go to and say, like, okay, how does this, which of these tools fits best? Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Right.
It makes sense to me. I didn't mean to skip that part.
Yeah. As you think about that going forward, look at the goals that are identified within the strategic plan. Again, I've got just 3 of them that are here that deal with availability, the range of housing stock that the city manager referenced, as well as the affordability of both new and existing housing, and then the whole equity, access, and the viability of them. So there is information within the draft plan and briefly touched into the housing presentation that Mullen and Lonergan did that might help frame that conversation.
I have to say that just even given the conversation, I feel like we need to really kind of rethink maybe what happens in the next discussion about this and how we look forward to it. So we'll be thinking about it, but if you also have some suggestions, I'd love to hear from you.
So I think, Councilwoman DeBala, to answer your question, I would say, like we do on a lot of issues, if you have ideas, email them to the full council and the staff working on this project, and they'll be thrown in the mix as we are moving forward.
Yeah.
So.
And as you refine your goals, the recommendations are intended to advance you towards those goals. So if the goals have changed, the steps may change too.
And also, if as you're looking even at these things that you saw today, if there's something that you really don't like or you don't think is really helpful, it's good to know that, because then that kind of also helps us focus the goals and say, we're not going to emphasize too much X. So.
If you'd like some staff input on that, I can give you some.
Yeah, and I think also, I think these housing goals are a good place to start, and I think it's just this next level of then thinking about what do each of these, what do these actually mean, and how do we measure them, and put some life.
And are there other?
Yeah, those, but like, how do we put some life to these? So, yeah.
The other thing that this might have an impact too on is we offer a variety of programming.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to offer all of it. There are some programs that are sort of legacy programs, if you will, that it may be worth revisiting in terms of your conversation regarding staff capacity and consulting services, in terms of phasing out some of the things that we do in an effort to sort of redirect energies towards achieving the revised goals that you've identified for the community.
I would also suggest that as we think about this, that we realize that when we set those goals, we are not all alone in trying to meet those goals. We live within a large county that shares some of the responsibility.
The other thing to take into consideration too was that not all of you were here when those goals were originally established. So there are 3 new council members since this process started. So it's a whole new world.
Councilmember Stevens, did you have something to say? I did it again. Smith.
Just a couple questions. One, when we allow the large rent, the large landlords, nonprofit landlords, to opt out of rent stabilization, is there a clock on that, or does that run with their ownership of the property?
There is a clock on it. They don't really get to opt in or out of rent stabilization. To be exempt from one element of the rent stabilization or the laws that govern rents, they have to be have entered into an agreement with another entity, governmental entity, to provide affordable housing to individuals that are at varying degrees of low and moderate income status. So we have some properties where they have one unit that's exempt from the restrictions regarding the rent increases, and that's just for a year. But we also have some like that are for 40 years. So it varies depending upon the agreement that they've entered into, that they've provided us documenting that their goal is to provide affordable housing to people who need affordable housing.
Well, I would like for the council to be able to look at some of those agreements in a shorter time period rather than your example 40 years, to use that as an incentive for some of these landlords that are not providing some of the things that they initially said they were going to do for their tenants. You know, we only have a few things that we can, you know, almost use as like a hammer, pilots, and, you know, coming up here on the dais and saying bad things about them. But other than that, yes, there's COLTA, but that is not a guarantee that whatever the issue is, that is before a number of tenants in their building will get resolved, and especially these really small buildings, but that's a different issue. But I would like for us to, whether it's a 5 years, 7 years, for, you know, councils to be able to look at, does it make sense to, you know, force these landlords back into rent stabilization?
We can do that. There are 2 pieces of information that might be helpful as you think about that. One is the properties that have the longer exemption period are federally funded, and the federal law doesn't care what Tacoma Park thinks about rent stabilization. They're already exempt. We encouraged them to participate in the program so that there was some equity across the board, so that everybody went through the process and we had information about everyone, even though technically they didn't really have to do it. So like Victory Tower, for example, they've always been exempt from rent stabilization based on the federal law. The other thing to keep in just as a point of information, I've been tracking the rents that can be charged at these properties, and they are based on the area median income. It's a formula that HUD uses. And you may have been reading about how wages are flat pretty much across the board, even though we have a sort of burgeoning economy. So the rents that have been enacted or that can be applied at many of these properties are actually, the rent increases are actually lower than what people would be seeing if they were subject to rent stabilization, which I found kind of ironic about the whole thing.
Okay. My other question is regarding feasibility studies. Does your department automatically do them when a large parcel becomes available for sale in the city? Like, for example, J&A was an internal feasibility study done to see how that might work in the city's portfolio, or offering it up to multifamily developers so that they could, help us meet our goals for affordable housing.
The city does not own any property that we would have that knowledge in advance. Are you talking about, which property are you talking about?
When J&A, Lunch and Learn was at J&A for a number of years.
Okay, John Nevins Andrews.
And it was, the Ventus community said it was going to go on sale, Did the city talk to them and say, hey, can we do a feasibility study before you put this on the market and see what we think would be the best direction for this property?
For that particular property, we met with the people that were brokering the transaction.
Michael's company.
Actually, we spoke with the owners and gave them their options regarding the redevelopment of the site.
Of J&A or the owners of the Michael's company?
Both. The owners of the property.
The Ventus.
Yeah.
Right.
They have so many different names, and it's hard to keep track of sometimes. So we interacted with them regarding their options, encouraged them to consider a variety of housing possibilities. Given the zoning of much of the property in Tacoma Park, there aren't a whole lot of options regarding higher density residential development.
Well, they'd have to get the zoning changed.
True, which was shared with them.
Right.
But as far as doing an actual feasibility study, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think two things. One is that's expensive. It can be. And the other thing is that we didn't have the goals. So part of this is, I mean, we certainly as a staff talk with people, think about, dream what options might be, but in terms of a systematic approach, that's not been something that we have to work with. And so part of what I'm hoping that is one of the elements that comes out of this is that we have something to turn to really easily to say, we're looking for this kind of a property, this kind of a use, and be able to plug somebody right into it and really, see when it's important and worth the cost to do a study like that.
Okay.
And we have the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund, which when J&A first went on the market wasn't.
That's right,
around.
we didn't have that.
Well,
And they won $9 million for the property.
Yeah,
So.
you guys have to save a bunch of money. We also are fairly assertive about making referrals and giving people the heads up that a property is coming up for sale.
All right, well, it's before 11 o'clock. I think we've done as much as we can this evening. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you for doing this regroup for us, and we'll move forward. Reminder, we do not have a council meeting next week, so that everyone can go to Annapolis and attend the Maryland Municipal League Conference. As Councilmember Smith said, attend at least one day, and if you can, attend on Wednesday the 10th. So thank you, everyone, and we will see you Monday night for the tour of the LEDs.